Single dad janitor sang to a crying baby, unaware the tech CEO, Mom was listening outside. But when she opened that door, she didn't just find her baby's comfort, she found the one man she thought she'd never need. And the shocking truth that could change both their lives forever. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead as James Holloway guided his mop across the linoleum floor of Bright Steps Early Learning Center. The familiar scent of pine cleaner filled the empty hallway, and his shoes squeaked against the freshly cleaned surface. After 8 years of night shifts here, the quiet had become almost comforting. He glanced at his watch, 10:30 p.m. The building should have been empty by now. The last teacher usually left by 7, and he'd gotten used to having the place to himself during his evening cleaning routine. That's why the sound caught him off guard. A faint whimper echoed through the hallway, followed by a distressed cry that made him pause mid-stroke. James tilted his head, listening. The cry came again. Clearer this time, definitely a baby, and it was coming from the infant room down the hall. His heart quickened. Working late hours, he learned every normal sound in this building. The hum of the heating system, the occasional creak of settling walls, even the scurrying of mice in the ceiling during winter. But a crying baby at this hour? That wasn't right. James propped his mop against the wall and walked toward the sound, his footsteps careful and measured. The cry grew louder as he approached room 102, the Tiny Stars nursery. Through the window in the door, he could see the dim glow of the nightlight casting soft shadows on the walls, decorated with painted moons and stars. He pushed the door open slowly, wincing at its slight creak. The crying was clear now, coming from a white crib in the corner. James moved closer, his training as a Marine medic kicking in as he assessed the situation. In the crib lay a baby girl, no more than 6 months old, her face red from crying. "Hey there, little one," he whispered, his voice gentle. "What are you doing here all alone?" The baby hiccuped between sobs, her tiny fist waving in the air. James recognized her, Hope Marston, one of their newest enrollees. He'd seen her being dropped off in the mornings, always by different nannies, never by her mother. Without hesitation, James reached down and carefully lifted Hope from her crib. Years of experience with his own daughter, Lily had taught him the proper way to support a baby's head and neck. He cradled her against his chest, her small body trembling with each sob. "Shh, shh," he soothed, starting to sway gently from side to side. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're not alone." Hope's cries began to soften as James walked slowly around the room, his movements steady and rhythmic. The position felt familiar. How many nights had he done this with Lily after Sarah passed? The memory brought a bittersweet ache to his chest. Almost without thinking, he began to sing softly, his voice low and warm in the quiet room. It was an old country lullaby his mother used to sing to him, the same one he'd later sung to Lily. "Down in the valley, valley so low, hang your head over. Hear the wind blow, hear the wind blow. Dear, hear the wind blow, hang your head over. Hear the wind blow." Hope's crying subsided to quiet whimpers. Her tiny hand found the fabric of his work shirt and gripped it tight. James continued singing, his voice growing a bit stronger as the baby relaxed in his arms. "Roses love sunshine, violets love dew. Angels in heaven know I love you. Know I love you, dear. Know I love you. Angels in heaven know I love you." The baby's breathing began to even out, her body growing heavier in his arms as sleep started to take hold. James kept swaying, kept singing, his rough hands gentle as they patted her, back in time with the melody. There was something about holding a baby that made the world feel simpler, more precious. In moments like these, the weight of his own losses felt a little lighter. Writing your name and mine on a tree, pray to the Lord it never will fade, never will fade, dear, never will fade. Writing your name and mine on a tree. Hope was fully asleep now, her face peaceful against his shoulder. James hummed the last few lines, letting his voice fade naturally into the quiet room. He stood there for a moment longer, just holding her, remembering how it felt when Lily was this small. Unknown to him, just outside the partially open door, Elena Marston stood frozen in place. Tears tracked silently down her cheeks as she watched this stranger, this janitor she'd barely noticed before, holding her daughter with such natural tenderness. Her hand covered her mouth, muffling any sound that might break the spell of the moment. James adjusted his hold on Hope, making sure she was secure as he moved toward her crib. The moonlight streaming through the window caught the silver in his dark hair, highlighting the gentle expression on his weathered face. He looked down at the sleeping baby, a soft smile touching his lips. "Sweet dreams, little one," he whispered, carefully laying her back in the crib. His calloused fingers brushed a wisp of hair from her forehead with surprising gentleness. "Someone must be worried about you by now." He stood there for a moment longer, watching to make sure Hope stayed asleep, then turned toward the door. In the hallway, Elena quickly pressed herself against the wall beside the door frame, her heart pounding. She could hear his footsteps approaching, the sound of the door closing fully, and then his shoes squeaking against the clean floor as he moved away. Elena remained still, listening as the sound of his footsteps faded down the hallway. Only then did she let out the breath she'd been holding, her hand pressed against her chest where her heart still raced. Through the window, she could see her daughter sleeping peacefully in her crib, completely unaware of the moment that had just unfolded, a moment that had shaken her mother's carefully constructed world. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cracked sidewalk as James trudged up the steps to his second-floor apartment. His muscles ached from hours of mopping and scrubbing, but the memory of that tiny baby girl's peaceful face made the exhaustion worthwhile. Before he could reach for his keys, the door across the hall creaked open. Mrs. Dillard emerged, her silver hair neatly pinned back and her kind eyes twinkling behind wire-rimmed glasses. "There you are, James. Lily's just finishing her breakfast. Thanks for watching her again, Mrs. D." James pulled out his wallet, but the elderly woman waved it away. "Put that away. You know, looking after that sweet girl is the highlight of my morning." She patted his arm. "Though you look dead on your feet. Everything all right at work?" James managed a tired smile. "Just an eventful night shift." He didn't mention the crying baby or the lullaby. Some things felt too personal to share, even with Mrs. Dillard. Inside his apartment, the scent of cinnamon toast greeted him. Lily sat at their small kitchen table, her dark curls falling around her face as she concentrated on drawing in her sketchbook. She looked up at his entrance, her face brightening. "Daddy!" She launched herself at him, and James caught her in a tight hug, breathing in the familiar strawberry scent of her shampoo. "Hey, sweetheart, were you good for Mrs. Dillard?" "Uh-huh. I made you a picture." Lily dragged him to the table where her latest masterpiece lay waiting. A rainbow arched across the paper, with stick figures holding hands beneath it. "It's beautiful, Lil." James kissed the top of her head. "Now, grab your backpack. Mrs. D will walk you to school while I get some sleep." After seeing Lily off, James collapsed onto his bed, still in his work clothes. His last thought before drifting off was of tiny fingers curled around his thumb and the echo of an old country song. The afternoon came too quickly. James showered, changed into his spare uniform, and headed to the main corporate building where he worked his second job. The gleaming glass structure stood in stark contrast to the homey warmth of Bright Steps Daycare. Here, everything was sleek, modern, and impersonal. He was emptying trash bins on the executive floor when a familiar voice made him freeze. "Mr. Holloway?" He turned to find Elena Marston standing in her office doorway. In the daylight, she looked different from the shadow he'd glimpsed the night before. Her dark suit was perfectly tailored, her posture commanding, but there was something vulnerable in her eyes that reminded him of the tears he'd pretended not to notice. "Ma'am?" He straightened, suddenly very aware of his worn uniform. "Could I have a word?" She gestured to her office. James's stomach tightened as he followed her inside. The space was minimal and efficient, like its owner, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Elena didn't sit behind her imposing desk, but leaned against it, arms crossed. "About last night," she began, and James braced himself for a reprimand. Instead, her voice softened. "I wanted to thank you." "Ma'am?" "For helping with Hope, my daughter." Elena uncrossed her arms, her professional facade cracking slightly. "She's been having trouble sleeping lately, and I've never heard her settle so quickly for anyone." James shifted uncomfortably. "Just an old lullaby my mama used to sing." "Well, it worked." Elena straightened all business again. "Which is why I have a proposition for you. Would you consider taking on some morning hours at Bright Steps? I could arrange additional compensation, of course." The offer caught him off guard. "You want me to? Help with Hope in the mornings. Nothing complicated, just being there when she gets fussy. Olivia, the daycare manager, already knows you and trusts you with the facility." Elena's eyes met his. "I wouldn't ask if I hadn't seen how good you are with children." James thought of his own tight budget, of Lily's growing needs. "I'd need to check my schedule, make sure I can arrange things with my daughter." "Of course. Take some time to think it over." Elena handed him a business card. "Let me know your decision by tomorrow." That evening, James stirred sauce into a pot of spaghetti while Lily set their small table. The card from Elena Marston sat on the counter, its elegant lettering catching the kitchen light. "Daddy?" Lily twirled her fork in her pasta. "How come you look worried?" James smiled at his perceptive daughter. "I got offered some extra work at the daycare in the mornings. But that's when you sleep. I could sleep in the afternoon instead, before my evening shift." He watched her face carefully. "There's this little baby who needs some help, and her mama thinks I might be good at it." Lily considered this while chewing. "Is she nice? The baby?" "Yeah, she is. Her name's Hope, like in my drawings." Lily's eyes lit up. "And we could use the extra money for my new school shoes?" James's heart squeezed. Of course, she'd noticed his concern over the upcoming expenses. "That's right, sweetheart. Then you should do it." Lily nodded decisively. "Mrs. Dillard says helping people is good for the soul." James reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "When did you get so wise?" "I'm 7 now, Daddy." "That's practically grown up." Her serious expression made him laugh, easing the last of his doubts. Later, after tucking Lily in, James pulled out Elena's card and composed a careful text message accepting the position. Whatever came next, he'd face it with his daughter's blessing and the memory of a baby's trusting smile to guide him. The early morning light was just beginning to peek over the horizon as James pulled into the Bright Steps parking lot. His old pickup truck rumbled to a stop in the empty lot, the clock on his dashboard reading 6:25 a.m. He sat for a moment, hands still on the wheel, taking deep breaths to calm his nerves. The building looked different in the dawn light, softer somehow, with gentle shadows playing across its brick facade. James grabbed his thermos of coffee and made his way to the entrance, his work boots quiet against the concrete. Using his newly issued key card, he unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The hallways were silent except for the gentle hum of the heating system. As he approached the infant room, he heard the soft tapping of computer keys. Elena Marston sat in the rocking chair by the window, her laptop balanced on one knee while she cradled Hope against her chest with her free arm. The baby was fussing quietly, her tiny face scrunched up in displeasure. "Good morning," James said softly, not wanting to startle them. Elena looked up, her professional facade slightly cracked by the early hour and evident fatigue. "Mr. Holloway, thank you for coming so early." "James, please," he corrected gently, setting his thermos down on a nearby table. "Is she having trouble settling?" Elena nodded, her fingers still hovering over the keyboard. "She's been restless since we got here. I have a video conference in 30 minutes. But..." She glanced down at Hope with a mixture of concern and helplessness. "May I?" James asked, holding out his arms. After a moment's hesitation, Elena carefully transferred Hope to him. The baby's whimpers grew louder at the movement, but James cradled her close, one large hand supporting her head, while the other held her securely against his chest. Then, just as he had that first night, James began to sing. His voice was low and gentle, the old country lullaby floating through the quiet room. "Down in the valley, valley so low, hang your head over, hear the wind blow." Hope's cries gradually softened, her tiny fingers clutching at James's shirt. Elena watched them, her laptop momentarily forgotten. In the growing morning light, James could see the dark circles under her eyes, partially hidden by careful makeup. The next few mornings fell into a similar pattern. Elena would arrive early with Hope, trying to balance her demanding schedule with her daughter's needs. James would help settle the baby, singing softly or walking her around the room while Elena worked nearby. On the fourth morning, Elena surprised him by having 2 coffee cups on the table instead of just her usual one. "I notice you always bring your own," she said, gesturing to the cup. "But the coffee cart downstairs opens early, and I thought, well, it's the least I can do." James accepted the cup with a grateful smile. "Thank you. That's very kind." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, Hope sleeping peacefully in her crib. The morning sun painted warm stripes across the carpet through the vertical blinds. "She seems to really respond to your voice," Elena observed, watching her daughter's peaceful face. James nodded, his fingers tightening slightly around the coffee cup. "My wife used to say I had a gift for calming children. She was a kindergarten teacher." Elena's eyes softened. "Was?" "Car accident," James said quietly, the words still difficult even after 5 years. "Black ice on the highway." Lily was only 2 at the time. Elena was silent for a long moment, her usual composed expression wavering. "I'm so sorry," she finally said, and there was a genuine warmth in her voice that James hadn't heard before. "It was hard," James admitted, "but Lily, she gave me a reason to keep going. Children have a way of doing that." Elena looked down at her coffee cup, her fingers tracing the rim. They do, she agreed softly. Though sometimes I wonder if I'm doing right by Hope. All of this. She gestured vaguely at her laptop and phone. It takes so much time. You're here with her, James said simply. That matters. Elena's shoulders tensed slightly. My past. It's complicated. I don't usually talk about it. James nodded, understanding in his eyes. We all have parts of our story we keep to ourselves. The moment was interrupted by Hope's stirring, and they both rose to check on her. As James watched Elena gently lift her daughter, he saw past the polished exterior to the mother beneath. Someone trying her best, just like him. That evening, James returned home later than usual, having stayed to help with some extra cleaning after his shift. The apartment was quiet as he unlocked the door, Mrs. Dillard having left a note saying Lily had fallen asleep on the couch. His daughter lay curled under her favorite blanket, her dark hair spilling across the cushions. On the coffee table in front of her was one of her drawings, done in bright crayon colors. James picked it up carefully, his throat tightening as he looked at the familiar figures, himself and Lily holding hands as they always did in her pictures. But now there was something new, a taller figure holding what looked like a baby, drawn with the same careful attention his daughter always gave to the things she loved most. James looked from the drawing to his sleeping daughter, his heart full of an emotion he couldn't quite name. He tucked the blanket more securely around Lily and sat down beside her, the drawing still in his hands as the night settled quietly around them. The morning had started like any other at Bright Steps. James moved quietly through his tasks, wiping down the colorful plastic tables and sanitizing toys while keeping a watchful eye on Hope. She was propped up in her bouncer, contentedly watching him work with those observant brown eyes that seemed to take in everything. You're my little supervisor today, aren't you? James said softly, earning a toothless grin from Hope. He had just finished organizing the block corner when a piercing shriek cut through the peaceful morning quiet. The fire alarm blasted through the building's speaker system, its harsh electronic wail echoing off the walls. Around him, the other babies in the infant room startled awake, their cries joining the cacophony. Without hesitation, James rushed to Hope, who had already begun to wail in distress. I've got you, sweetheart, he murmured, scooping her up against his chest. He cupped one hand protectively over her ear, pressing her other ear against his shoulder to muffle the sound. His body moved instinctively, swaying in a gentle rhythm as he began to hum, You Are My Sunshine, the same lullaby he'd sung to Lily during thunderstorms. Hope's tiny fingers clutched at his shirt as he moved quickly to check on the other infants. The other early morning staff were already rushing in, following emergency protocols. Through the chaos, James heard Miss Andrea, the lead teacher, calling out that it was just a system malfunction. The door burst open, and Elena Marston stood there, her usual composed appearance slightly disheveled. Her eyes were wide with panic as she scanned the room, her designer heels clicking rapidly across the floor. Hope, she called out, voice tight with worry. Right here, James answered calmly, still swaying with the baby. She's okay, just a false alarm. Elena rushed over, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her daughter. But as she got closer, she slowed, taking in the scene before her. Hope had already settled, her cries reduced to occasional hiccups as she nestled safely in James's arms. The baby's eyes were heavy-lidded, nearly dozing despite the continuing alarm. She's almost asleep, Elena said in disbelief, watching her normally sensitive daughter rest peacefully against James's shoulder. The maintenance team finally silenced the alarm, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. James continued his gentle swaying, humming softly until Hope was completely settled. Only then did he carefully transfer her to Elena's waiting arms. Thank you, Elena whispered, holding Hope close. She usually gets so upset by loud noises. I was terrified when I heard the alarm. All in a day's work, James replied with a modest shrug, though his eyes were soft as he watched Hope snuggle into her mother's embrace. Later that morning, after the excitement had died down and the other babies were settled, Elena returned to the infant room. This time, she carried a glossy gift bag. I know it's not much, she said, holding out the bag to James, but I wanted to show my appreciation. James accepted the bag with surprise, pulling out a sleek silver travel mug. His name was engraved on the side in elegant script, along with the words, Hope's Guardian Angel. Miss Marston, you didn't have to. Elena, she corrected him gently. And yes, I did. Would you? Would you like to take a coffee break? The outdoor picnic area is nice this time of morning. The spring air was crisp as they sat at one of the wooden picnic tables, steam rising from their coffee cups. Hope dozed in her carrier between them, making tiny snuffling sounds in her sleep. "It's amazing how children find their own sources of comfort," Elena said, breaking the comfortable silence. "I've tried everything to help Hope feel secure. Special blankets, music boxes, those expensive white noise machines. But nothing works quite like." She trailed off, gesturing vaguely toward James. James smiled, thinking of his own daughter. Lily was the same way after Sarah, my wife, passed. All the child psychology books in the world couldn't tell me what she needed. Sometimes it's just about being there, being steady. Kids can sense that. Elena's fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup. "I never had that growing up. The foster homes. Well, steady wasn't exactly their strong suit." She seemed surprised by her own admission, as if the words had slipped out without permission. James nodded, understanding the weight of what she'd shared. "Sometimes we learn the most about comfort from never having had it ourselves," he said quietly. They sat in companionable silence for a while longer, watching the morning mist slowly lift from the playground equipment. When it was time to head back inside, Elena gathered Hope's carrier with careful movements, trying not to wake her. "James?" she said, pausing. "Thank you. Not just for today, but for—" She gestured vaguely again, seemingly unable to find the right words. James understood anyway. With a warm smile and a nod, he watched them head back inside before gathering his new travel mug. The metal was cool in his hands, but the engraved words filled him with a familiar warmth, the same feeling he got when Lily called for him after a nightmare, or when Hope settled in his arms. The morning mist swirled around his ankles as he walked home, the travel mug held carefully in his hands. The weight of it felt significant, like the weight of trust placed in his care. It stirred memories of holding Lily for the first time, of learning to be a father. And now, these mornings with Hope. A strange mix of emotions filled his chest, the familiar ache of responsibility and something newer, something hopeful that he wasn't quite ready to name. The morning sun filtered through the high windows of Bright Step's music room, casting warm squares of light across the pale blue carpet. James had brought Hope here while the cleaning crew waxed the main playroom floors. The quiet space, tucked away at the end of the east hallway, felt like a peaceful refuge. Hope sat contentedly in her carrier, kicking her tiny feet as James organized the room's scattered instruments. He smiled at her enthusiasm. Even at 6 months old, she seemed drawn to anything musical. "You like this stuff, don't you?" he asked softly, earning a happy gurgle in response. As he straightened a rack of toy drums, something caught his eye in the corner, an old acoustic guitar, propped against the wall. Dust had settled on its surface, but the strings looked intact. James picked it up carefully, running his hand along the smooth wood. "Haven't played one of these in ages," he murmured, settling onto a nearby child-sized chair. The small seat made him look almost comical, his tall frame folded up like origami, but Hope's delighted expression made it worth it. He tested the strings gently. The guitar was surprisingly in tune. His fingers found the familiar chords of an old lullaby he used to play for Lily. The melody filled the small room, soft and sweet. "Hush now, little one. The day is almost done," he sang quietly, his voice carrying the tender tune. "Stars are coming out to play, while the moon lights up our way." Hope's eyes widened with wonder. She waved her arms excitedly, babbling along in her own baby language. James couldn't help but chuckle at her enthusiasm. "You want to be in the band, huh?" he asked, continuing to strum. The morning light caught Hope's dark curls, making them shine like copper pennies. She looked so much like her mother when she smiled. Lost in the music, James didn't notice Elena standing in the doorway until he finished the song. She wore her usual pristine business suit, but something in her expression seemed softer than usual. "I didn't know you played," she said quietly, entering the room. James carefully set the guitar aside. "Used to play a lot more. These days it's mostly just when I can find the time." Elena picked up Hope, who immediately reached for her mother's pearl necklace. "She really responds to music. I've never seen her so engaged." James noticed the slight catch in her voice. Elena held Hope carefully, competently, but there was a hesitation in her movements, like someone handling precious china they feared might break. "All babies love music," James said encouragingly. "It's a natural thing." Elena sat down on one of the child-sized chairs, adjusting Hope in her lap. For the moment, she just watched her daughter play with her necklace, seemingly lost in thought. "Can I tell you something?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something I haven't really told anyone?" James nodded, staying quiet, sensing the weight of the moment. "Hope." Elena paused, taking a deep breath. Hope was conceived through anonymous sperm donation. I had my career, my company was taking off, and I thought I could do it all on my own. I've always done everything on my own. She touched Hope's cheek gently. But sometimes, when she cries, when she needs something, and I can't figure out what it is, I feel so lost. Like I'm failing at the one thing that should come naturally. James felt his heart tighten at the raw honesty in her voice. He thought of those first months with Lily after Sarah died, how overwhelming it had felt to be solely responsible for this tiny human being. Being a parent doesn't come naturally to anyone, he said softly. We all just do our best and hope it's enough. Elena looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. But you're so good with her. You always seem to know exactly what she needs. That's just experience, James assured her, pushing down the strange flutter in his chest at her words. And every child is different. Lily was colicky for months. I thought I was going to lose my mind. But we figured it out together. Hope reached up and patted Elena's face with her tiny hand, drawing a genuine smile from her mother. The gesture seemed to break some of the tension in the room. Thank you, Elena said quietly, for listening and for being so good with her. James nodded, feeling strangely moved by her vulnerability. He wanted to say more, to somehow convey that she wasn't alone, but the words wouldn't come. Later that evening, after his shift ended, James drove to the VA hospital. He tried to donate blood regularly. It was something small he could do to help, and his rare blood type was always in demand. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as the nurse, Marion, prepared his arm. She'd been drawing his blood for years now, her gentle efficiency always appreciated. Type AB negative? She commented, checking his chart. You know, it's funny, we just had a request for this type last week. It's incredibly rare, less than 1% of the population. James nodded, watching the dark red liquid flow through the tube. Yeah, that's what they always tell me. My mom had it too. The genetics of blood types are fascinating, Marion continued, adjusting the collection bag. It's hereditary, of course. Children can only have certain blood types based on their parents. James felt something stir in the back of his mind, a whisper of a thought he couldn't quite grasp. He thought of Hope's bright eyes, her immediate response to his singing, the way she settled so naturally in his arms. But before the thought could fully form, Marion was pressing a cotton ball to his arm and wrapping it with medical tape. All done. You're good to go, James. Same time next month? Yeah, he said distractedly, rolling down his sleeve. Same time next month. The morning air was crisp as James arrived at Bright Steps, his breath forming small clouds in the early dawn light. He pulled his worn denim jacket tighter and quickened his pace toward the entrance, his new travel mug warming his hands. The security guard, Mike, gave him a friendly nod as he swiped his badge. Elena's sleek black Tesla was already in its usual spot. These days, she seemed to arrive earlier and earlier, though James wasn't sure if it was dedication to work or something else that drove her schedule. He found her in Hope's daycare room, attempting to juggle her laptop, phone, and an overflowing diaper bag. Here, let me help with that, James offered, setting his mug down on a nearby shelf. Elena's shoulders relaxed slightly at his voice. Thanks, James. I'm running behind on everything this morning. She passed him the diaper bag, its contents threatening to spill onto the floor. No problem. Why don't I organize this while you finish your call? He gestured to her phone, which was buzzing insistently. She mouthed a grateful thank you before stepping into the hallway, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. Hope watched from her crib, contentedly chewing on a teething ring. James set the diaper bag on the changing table and began sorting through it. He created neat piles. Diapers, wipes, spare clothes, bottles. A manila folder had gotten mixed in with everything else, its corner bent and crumpled. As he tried to straighten it, a paper slipped out. He bent to retrieve it, his eyes automatically scanning the document as he did. It was a pediatric report, the kind parents received after routine checkups. Most of it was standard information, height, weight, immunizations. But one detail made him freeze mid-motion. Blood type, AB negative. James felt the room tilt, slightly. He steadied himself against the changing table, his heart thundering in his chest. AB negative, one of the rarest blood types in the world. The same blood type his late wife Sarah had, the same blood type Lily had inherited. Is everything okay? Elena's voice startled him. He quickly slid the paper back into the folder, his hands slightly shaking. Yeah, just organizing everything. He gestured to the neat piles he'd made. Easier to find things this way. She smiled, though her eyes held a hint of concern. You're always so organized. Military training? Something like that, he managed, his mind still reeling from what he'd seen. He watched as Elena lifted Hope from her crib, studied the baby's features with new eyes. Had he been imagining things lately? The way Hope's eyes crinkled when she smiled, just like Lily's? The way she responded to his voice, his songs? The rest of the morning passed in a blur. James went through the motions of his usual routine, but his thoughts kept circling back to that one piece of information. He donated to a sperm bank years ago, before meeting Sarah. It had been during his military service, when a fellow Marine's struggle with infertility had opened his eyes to how he might help others. During his lunch break, he found himself in his truck, phone in hand. The sperm bank's number was surprisingly easy to find. They had a website now, something that didn't exist when he'd made his donation. His fingers hovered over the keypad for a long moment before he finally pressed dial. Pacific Northwest Fertility Center, how may I help you? James cleared his throat. Hi, I'm a past donor. From about 8 years ago, I was wondering about the process for making inquiries about possible matches. The receptionist's voice became professionally warm. Of course, sir, we have a formal process for donor inquiries. I'll need to transfer you to our donor services department. 20 minutes later, James had filled out preliminary paperwork and scheduled a consultation for the following week. The process would be lengthy, he learned, and success wasn't guaranteed. Privacy laws protected both donors and recipients, but it was a start. That evening, after his night shift, James quietly opened the door to his apartment. Mrs. Dillard had left a note saying Lily had finished her homework and gone to bed on time. He found his daughter exactly where he expected. Curled up in her bed, her dark hair spread across her pillow like a fan, just like Sarah's used to. He sat gently on the edge of her bed, careful not to wake her. In the soft glow of her butterfly nightlight, he could see the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the peaceful expression on her face. She'd drawn another picture today. It was taped to her wall, showing their little family again, but this time with even more details. Hope in someone's arms, Elena standing nearby. James reached out and smoothed the strand of hair from Lily's forehead. There might be more family out there than we thought, he whispered, his voice barely audible in the quiet room. His daughter shifted slightly in her sleep, but didn't wake. James stayed there for a long moment, watching her sleep, his mind full of possibilities and questions. The same blood type couldn't be just coincidence, could it? And if it wasn't, what would that mean for all of them? He thought of Elena, of how fiercely independent she was, how carefully she guarded her privacy. He thought of Hope, of how naturally she fit into his arms when he sang to her. He thought of Lily, who seemed to sense something long before he did, drawing pictures of a family that might actually exist. The weight of this potential discovery settled over him like a heavy blanket. Whatever happened next would change everything, not just for him, but for all of them. And for now, that knowledge would have to be enough. James leaned down and placed a gentle kiss on Lily's forehead before quietly leaving her room, closing the door softly behind him. The consultation was a week away. Until then, he would keep this possibility close to his heart, a secret hope growing alongside his certainty that something extraordinary was unfolding. James sat at his small kitchen table, staring at the pristine white envelope from Pacific Northwest Fertility Center. His coffee had gone cold, forgotten beside a half-eaten piece of toast. Lily was at school, and the apartment felt unusually quiet, as if the world was holding its breath. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the envelope. The letterhead was formal, professional, just another piece of paper that could change everything. He began reading, his eyes moving slowly over each carefully typed word. Dear Mr. Holloway, in response to your inquiry regarding donation number A 2749, successful match confirmed. Recipient conception date, the 15th of September 2019. The paper crinkled in his tightening grip. James closed his eyes, doing the math in his head. Hope's birthday was in June 2020. The dates aligned perfectly. Genetic profile indicates rare blood type AB negative. His chest felt tight. The room seemed to spin slightly as the reality sank in. Hope, the baby girl who reached for him every morning, whose laugh brightened the darkest days, was his daughter, his biological child. James pushed back from the table, needing air. He grabbed his keys and jacket, moving on autopilot. The drive to Evergreen Memorial Cemetery was a blur of autumn colors and racing thoughts. He parked in the familiar spot, the one he'd visited hundreds of times over the past 5 years. Sarah's headstone stood under a maple tree, its leaves creating a carpet of red and gold around the gray marble. James knelt before it, brushing away a few stray leaves. The inscription was simple: Sarah Elizabeth Holloway, beloved wife and mother. "Hey, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice rough. "I need to talk to you about something big." The wind rustled through the trees, a sound that had always reminded him of Sarah's gentle laugh. Remember when we were trying for another baby? Before the accident? He traced the etched letters of her name with his finger. Those visits to the fertility center, all those tests. His voice caught. They kept my donation. They kept it, and now. A squirrel darted across a nearby headstone, momentarily drawing his attention. James pulled his jacket tighter against the autumn chill. "There's this little girl, Hope. She's at the daycare where I work. She's beautiful, Sarah. She has these big brown eyes that light up whenever she sees me." He paused, wiping moisture from his cheeks. "And now I know why. She's mine, our contribution to the world that we never knew about." The late afternoon sun filtered through the maple leaves, casting dappled shadows across the grave. James sat back on the grass, not caring about the dampness seeping through his jeans. I don't know what to do," he admitted. "Her mother, Elena, she's a good person. She's raising Hope alone, doing her best. But knowing what I know now," he shook his head. "I look at Hope, and I see what could have been, what should have been ours, together." A gentle breeze stirred the flowers someone had left at a neighboring grave. James watched them dance in the wind, remembering how Sarah used to arrange fresh flowers every Sunday. "I wish you were here to tell me what's right. You always knew how to make sense of things." He pulled out his phone, scrolling to a picture he'd taken at the daycare. Hope in her yellow dress, giggling at the camera. "Look at her, Sarah. She could have been our second miracle." The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. James stood slowly, his joints stiff from sitting on the cold ground. He placed his hand on top of the headstone, a gesture that had become ritual over the years. As the last rays of sunlight painted the cemetery in warm hues, James whispered, "I found her. I found the child we were never supposed to have." The autumn wind picked up, sending leaves swirling around him like nature's answer to his confession. He stood there for a moment longer, letting the reality of his discovery settle into his bones, before turning toward his car. The weight of this knowledge pressed heavy on his shoulders, but somehow, sharing it with Sarah had made it feel more real, and perhaps a little less overwhelming. The morning sun filtered through the daycare windows, casting warm patches of light across the colorful carpet where Hope sat playing with wooden blocks. James watched her from his position by the storage closet, his heart beating a little faster each time she looked his way. With those bright eyes, his eyes, he now realized. He gripped the mop handle tighter, trying to maintain his composure as Hope knocked over her tower of blocks with a delighted squeal. Every gesture, every little movement seemed different now, loaded with meaning. Was that determined set of her jaw when she concentrated just like his? Did she scrunch her nose the same way Lily did when she was younger? "Someone's in a good mood today," Elena commented, walking in with her usual travel mug of coffee. She wore a charcoal blazer over dark slacks, looking every bit the CEO she was. But her smile was soft as she watched Hope. "She's really getting good at stacking those blocks," James said, his voice slightly hoarse. He cleared his throat and added, "Making progress every day." Elena nodded, setting her laptop bag down. "She seems especially comfortable with you lately. I've never seen her take to anyone quite like this." James felt his chest tighten. If she only knew why. He forced himself to continue mopping, trying to maintain normalcy despite the weight of his secret. Hope crawled toward him, abandoning her blocks, and reached up with grabby hands. "Up," she demanded. One of the few words she knew. James looked at Elena, who nodded her permission. He set the mop aside and lifted Hope, his movements extra gentle now that he knew. She immediately grabbed his nose, a favorite game of hers, and giggled. "Got your nose," Elena translated with a laugh. "She does that to everyone, but you're the only one who plays along so well." James made exaggerated faces of surprise each time. Hope stole his nose, but his mind was racing. The DNA test kit he'd ordered sat hidden in his bathroom cabinet at home. One cheek swab would confirm everything, but the mere thought of taking that final step made his hands shake. "Oh, James." Olivia, the daycare manager, poked her head in. "Do you have a moment?" He carefully handed Hope back to Elena and stepped into the hallway. Olivia smiled warmly, clipboard in hand. "We're planning our annual Veterans Day celebration," she explained. "The children always love it when we have special performances. I remember you mentioned being a Marine, and I heard you playing guitar with the little ones. Would you consider doing a few songs? James rubbed the back of his neck. I'm not sure. The parents would love it, Olivia continued, especially the younger children's families. They really respond to music. His thoughts immediately went to Hope and how she lit up whenever he sang. What kind of songs were you thinking? Whatever you're comfortable with. Maybe something patriotic, and then some children's songs? It's next Friday morning. James nodded slowly. All right, I'll do it. Wonderful, Olivia beamed. I'll add you to the program. When James returned to the room, Hope was fussing in Elena's arms. Without thinking, he started humming their usual lullaby, and the baby immediately turned toward the sound, settling. I don't know how you do that. Elena shook her head, wonder in her voice. Just lucky, I guess, James replied, the words tasting bitter with their half-truth. The morning continued with its usual routine, but everything felt heightened to James. Each time Hope reached for him, each smile she gave, every sound she made, it all carried the weight of their connection. He found himself studying her features more carefully, looking for traces of himself or Lily. During Hope's morning nap, Elena worked quietly on her laptop while James organized the toy shelves. He kept stealing glances at the sleeping baby, wondering how he would ever find the right words to tell Elena the truth. The DNA test would make it undeniable, but what then? James? Elena's voice startled him. Are you all right? You seem distracted today. He forced a smile. Just thinking about the Veterans Day performance. Oh? Are you participating? Olivia asked me to play some songs. Nothing fancy. Elena's face brightened. Hope will love that. She already responds so well to your singing. The pride in her voice made his chest ache. James busied himself with straightening stuffed animals, unable to meet her eyes. Later, that afternoon, after his shift ended, James walked home with his mind full of swirling thoughts. The DNA test kit waited at home like a ticking clock. One simple swab could change everything, or confirm what he already knew in his heart to be true. He found Lily at their kitchen table, working on homework. She looked up as he entered, her face brightening. Dad, can you help me with my science project? We're studying families and genetics. James nearly dropped his keys. Genetics? Yeah, like how kids look like their parents and stuff. Did you know some traits skip a generation? That's why I have Grandma's red hair, even though you and Mom didn't. James sat heavily in the chair beside her, looking at the worksheet covered in simple Punnett squares and family trees. That's right, Princess. Dad? Lily asked, putting down her pencil. Can I ask you something? Always. Could Hope come over to play sometime? I know she's just a baby, but I could show her my stuffed animals, and maybe we could all have dinner together? The innocent question hit James like a physical blow. He stared at his daughter Hope's half-sister and found himself unable to form words. How could he explain that Hope was already family? That the baby they saw at daycare shared the same blood that ran through Lily's veins? Lily waited for an answer, her eyes hopeful, but James couldn't find his voice. He stood up abruptly, mumbling something about starting dinner, and escaped to the kitchen, where he gripped the counter until his knuckles turned white. Behind him, he could hear Lily return to her homework, the scratch of her pencil, a quiet reminder of all the complications yet to come. The autumn rain drummed against the daycare windows, creating a gentle rhythm that made the morning feel more intimate than usual. James sat cross-legged on the floor near the cubbies, watching Hope stack colored blocks with determined concentration. His newfound knowledge of their connection made every little gesture of hers fascinating, the way she scrunched her nose and thought, just like Lily did. Elena worked quietly at her usual spot by the window, the blue glow of her laptop illuminating her face as she typed. The weather forecast had predicted storms, but none of them expected the sudden crack of thunder that made the lights flicker once, twice, and then go out completely. Hope whimpered at the darkness. Without hesitation, James scooted closer to her, humming softly. It's okay, sweet pea. Just a little darkness. Nothing to worry about. Elena's chair scraped against the floor as she moved to join them. In the dim light filtering through the rain-streaked windows, James could see her settling down on Hope's other side, her usual professional demeanor softening with concern. The backup generator should kick in soon, Elena said, her voice unusually quiet. She reached out to stroke Hope's hair, her fingers trembling slightly. Hope settled between them, seemingly content with the attention from both adults. The room felt smaller in the darkness, more personal, as if the walls had drawn closer to keep their secrets safe. You're good with her, Elena said after a while. I've never seen anyone connect with her the way you do. James swallowed hard, guilt pressing against his chest. Some people just have a way with kids, I guess. No. Elena shook her head. It's more than that. You understand something about safety that I'm still trying to learn. Thunder rolled again, but this time Hope barely noticed, too busy trying to grab James's fingers as he wiggled them in front of her. I never felt safe growing up, Elena continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Foster home to foster home, never knowing if the next place would be better or worse. You learn to keep your guard up, to never trust that good things will last. James stayed quiet, letting her words fill the darkness between them. He'd seen hints of her walls before, but never understood their foundation until now. When I decided to have Hope, Elena said, I thought I was being smart, careful, no messy relationships, no risk of abandonment, just me and my baby, on our terms. She laughed softly, but there was pain in the sound. I didn't realize how much of my past I'd be carrying into her future. You're trying to protect her? James said gently. There's nothing wrong with that, but I'm also scared of connecting with her. Elena's admission seemed to surprise even her. Every time she cries and I can't comfort her, every time someone else knows better what she needs, it feels like proof that I'm not cut out for this, that maybe I'm too broken to be what she needs. Hope babbled suddenly, reaching up to pat Elena's knee. The simple gesture brought tears to Elena's eyes. The system? James said carefully. It teaches kids to survive, not to live. But you've done more than survive, Elena. You've built something amazing, and you're here, good morning, trying to give Hope the stability you never had. Some days it feels impossible, Elena whispered, like I'm playing pretend at being a mother, and someday everyone will figure out I have no idea what I'm doing. Nobody knows what they're doing, James said, thinking of his own struggles with Lily after losing his wife. We just keep showing up, keep trying. That's what love looks like sometimes, just showing up, even when we're scared. The rain continued its steady pattern, creating a cocoon of sound around their conversation. Hope had settled comfortably against Elena's leg, her little hand still holding onto James's finger. When I found out I was pregnant, Elena said, I had this dream of being everything for her. Strong enough, loving enough, just enough. But watching you with her, she paused, collecting her thoughts. Maybe I've been wrong about what strength looks like. Maybe it's not about doing everything alone. James felt the weight of his secret, pressing harder against his heart. Here was Elena, opening up about her deepest fears, while he held back a truth that could change everything. But he knew this moment wasn't about him or his revelation. It was about Elena finding her way through her own darkness. You're already enough, he said softly. Hope doesn't need you to be perfect. She just needs you to be here, to keep trying, to keep loving her in your own way. The lights flickered back on suddenly, making them all blink at the brightness. Hope giggled at the change, reaching up toward James with grabby hands. Elena nodded, and James lifted the baby into his arms, his heart aching with the trust of the gesture. Elena stood slowly, smoothing her skirt with hands that seemed steadier now. She watched James bounce Hope gently, something new and vulnerable in her expression. For a moment, she looked like she might say more, but instead, she offered a small, genuine smile before walking away. James held Hope close, breathing in her baby powder scent, knowing that this quiet morning had shifted something fundamental between them all. In the aftermath of Elena's honesty, the truth he carried felt both heavier and more precious than before. The crisp autumn air nipped at James's fingers as he sat on the weathered park bench. Beside him, Lily scattered handfuls of breadcrumbs, giggling as pigeons waddled closer to feast. The plain white envelope from the DNA testing company felt heavy in his jacket pocket, though he knew it weighed almost nothing. Look, Daddy, that one's brave. Lily pointed at a speckled pigeon that hopped closer than the others. He reminds me of Hope. She's brave, too. She never cries when you hold her. James's heart tightened at the mention of Hope's name. You're right, sweetheart. She is brave. He pulled the envelope from his pocket, turning it over in his hands. What's that? Lily asked, temporarily distracted from her bird-feeding mission. Just some grown-up paperwork, James replied, his voice slightly rougher than usual. Keep feeding your friends. I need to read this real quick. With trembling fingers, he broke the seal and pulled out the crisp white paper inside. The medical jargon at the top swam before his eyes until he found what he was looking for, the results section. Probability of paternity, 99.9%. The words hit him like a physical blow. Even though he'd suspected, even though the blood type and timing had pointed to this, Seeing it confirmed in black and white made his world shift on its axis. He was Hope's father. The rest of the report blurred as tears pricked at his corners of his eyes. Statistics and scientific terms meant nothing compared to that one devastating truth. His daughter, his second daughter, was out there, being raised by another parent who had no idea of their connection. "Daddy?" Lily's small hand touched his arm. "Are you crying?" James quickly wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "Just something in my eye, sweetie. The wind, you know?" But Lily, perceptive as always, wasn't fooled. She crawled onto the bench beside him and wrapped her arms around his middle. "It's okay to be sad sometimes. You taught me that." He hugged her back, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "You're right again. You're getting pretty wise for 7. Almost 8, she corrected, making him smile despite everything. The pigeons continued their peaceful feast at their feet as James stared at the paper that changed everything. What was he supposed to do with this information? Elena had chosen to be a single mother. She'd specifically wanted an anonymous donor. Learning the truth could shatter the delicate trust they'd built over these past months. And yet, keeping this secret felt like a betrayal too. Every time he held Hope, sang to her, watched her eyes light up at his presence, he'd know. He'd know he was her father, and she was his daughter, and Elena would remain in the dark. "Can we get ice, Preem?" Lily's question pulled him from his thoughts. "It's pretty cold for ice cream, don't you think?" She shrugged. "You always say ice cream fixes everything, and you look like you need fixing." James folded the paper carefully and tucked it back into the envelope. "How about hot chocolate instead, with extra marshmallows? Is there any other way?" They walked hand in hand to the small cafe across from the park. James ordered their drinks, watching Lily count the marshmallows floating in her mug with serious concentration. The weight of the envelope in his pocket felt like a stone. If he told Elena, would she take Hope away, move to another city, never let him near either of them again? The thought made his chest ache. In just a few months, both Elena and Hope had become important parts of his life. Hope's morning smiles, Elena's rare but genuine laughs, the way they'd started to feel like. He couldn't finish that thought. It was too dangerous. Later that night, after tucking Lily into bed with an extra-long bedtime story, James stood at his kitchen sink. The envelope sat on the counter, innocent-looking but loaded with the power to change lives. He thought of Hope's tiny fingers wrapping around his thumb, Elena's vulnerable confession about growing up in foster care, Lily's drawings of their expanding family. With deliberate movements, he pulled out his lighter, the one he kept for emergencies, and held it to the corner of the paper. The flame caught quickly, eating away at the clinical words that proved what his heart already knew. He watched it burn in the sink, making sure every piece was consumed, then washed the ashes down the drain. But as the last bits of evidence disappeared, James knew the truth had taken root too deeply in his heart to ever wash away. Hope was his daughter, and somehow he had to find a way to live with that knowledge. He gripped the edge of the sink, his knuckles turning white. The distant sound of Lily's soft snoring drifted from her bedroom, reminding him of all he had to lose and all he had to protect. Whatever he decided, he had to think of both his daughters now. James ran the water one more time, making sure no trace of the letter remained. But the truth remained, burning brighter than any flame could match, sealed forever in his heart. The October sun painted golden streaks across Jefferson Park as James spread a red checkered blanket over the grass, his movements deliberate and careful. His hands trembled slightly as he smoothed out each wrinkle, wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake inviting Elena and Hope to the community's annual harvest picnic. The fabric felt rough beneath his fingertips, and he found himself adjusting the corners again and again, as if perfect placement could somehow guarantee the afternoon would go smoothly. Around them, the park buzzed with the gentle chaos of families claiming their spots for the day. Children's laughter echoed from the nearby playground, while the scent of grilled corn and barbecue smoke drifted from the pavilion where volunteers were setting up food stations. Orange and red maple leaves danced overhead, occasionally breaking free to spiral down onto the growing collection of picnic blankets scattered across the green expanse. "Daddy, can I set up the basket?" Lily bounced on her toes, her brown pigtails swinging with barely contained excitement. She'd spent the entire morning helping him pack sandwiches and fruit, practically vibrating with anticipation at the thought of meeting Hope outside the familiar walls of the daycare. Her small hands clutched a paper bag filled with homemade chocolate chip cookies she'd insisted on baking the night before. "Sure thing, sweetheart." James watched as she carefully arranged paper plates and napkins, making sure everything was perfectly aligned in neat little stacks. The sight made his chest tight with emotion. She was so much like her mother sometimes, with that same attention to detail and desire to make everything special for the people she cared about. Lily hummed quietly to herself as she worked, occasionally pausing to wave at other children she recognized from school. Her face glowed with the kind of pure joy that only came from having something wonderful to look forward to. She'd talked about this picnic for days, planning all the games she wanted to play with Hope, and asking James at least a dozen times if he thought babies liked autumn leaves. The sound of footsteps on grass made James look up from watching his daughter. Elena approached hesitantly, pushing Hope's stroller along the winding park path. She wore dark jeans and a soft blue sweater instead of her usual business attire, making her appear younger, more vulnerable somehow. Her hair was pulled back in a casual ponytail rather than her typical professional updo, and she'd traded her heels for comfortable white sneakers that looked brand new, as if she'd bought them specifically for this occasion. Hope cooed and kicked her feet in the stroller, clearly delighted by the outdoor adventure and the parade of new sights and sounds. She wore a tiny yellow sundress with matching hat that Elena had obviously chosen with care, and her bright eyes darted everywhere at once, taking in the colorful leaves, the other children playing, and the unfamiliar but exciting environment. "I wasn't sure we should come," Elena admitted as she reached the edge of their blanket, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. Her voice carried that familiar note of uncertainty that James had learned to recognize, the tone she used when she was stepping outside her comfort zone. "I don't usually do this kind of thing. Family gatherings, community events. I'm not really sure how they work." "I'm glad you did come," James said warmly, standing up and gesturing to the blanket with genuine enthusiasm. "Lily's been looking forward to it all week. She's barely talked about anything else." "Hi, Miss Elena." Lily waved enthusiastically, her whole body wiggling with excitement. "Hi, Hope. I brought my bubble wand. Babies love bubbles. At least, that's what Mrs. Patterson at school told me. She has 3 grandbabies." Elena's stance softened visibly as she settled onto the blanket, her movements becoming less rigid and more natural. She lifted Hope from the stroller with practiced ease, settling the baby comfortably in her lap. "That's very thoughtful of you, Lily. I'm sure Hope will love that." The afternoon unfolded like a gentle dream, each moment flowing seamlessly into the next. Lily produced her bubble wand from a small backpack and began blowing streams of iridescent bubbles that danced and shimmered in the warm breeze. They floated lazily across their picnic spot, catching the sunlight and creating tiny rainbows that made Hope squeal with absolute delight. Her chubby hands reached out to grab the impossible spheres, her face lighting up with wonder each time one popped against her fingers. They shared turkey sandwiches and fresh apple slices, while other families dotted the park around them with their own blankets and picnic baskets. The sounds of the Harvest Festival created a comfortable backdrop. Children playing, parents chatting, the distant strumming of a guitar from a group of teenagers near the pond. A light breeze rustled through the oak trees above them, sending down an occasional shower of golden leaves that Lily collected in careful piles. James found himself watching Elena as much as the children, fascinated by the gradual transformation taking place before his eyes. The usual tension in her shoulders had eased completely, and genuine smiles came more and more frequently. When Hope grabbed a handful of Elena's hair and tugged with surprising strength, instead of the worried frown he might have expected, Elena actually laughed. A warm, rich sound that seemed to surprise her as much as it delighted him. The laughter made something flutter deep in James's chest, like a bird testing its wings after a long winter. "She's getting strong," Elena said, gently untangling Hope's tiny fist from her ponytail, "and very determined about what she wants." "Wonder where she gets that from," James teased gently, earning another of those unexpected smiles. "Here," he said, reaching for Hope as Elena attempted to juggle eating her sandwich while keeping the baby entertained. "I'll take her while you eat. You need both hands for that." Elena handed the baby over without the slightest hesitation, a far cry from their first awkward interactions months ago, when she'd seemed almost afraid to let anyone else hold Hope. The trust implicit in that simple gesture wasn't lost on either of them. Hope immediately snuggled into James's chest, her tiny fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt like she belonged there. She fit perfectly against him, her weight warm and solid and reassuring. "She really loves you," Elena observed quietly, her voice soft with something that might have been wonder. She watched the way Hope's entire body relaxed against James, the way her breathing deepened and her eyelids began to flutter with contentment. The feeling's mutual, James admitted, bouncing Hope gently and humming the first few notes of the lullaby that had become theirs. The melody seemed to calm her instantly, and she made little cooing sounds in response, as if she were trying to hum along. Lily had wandered off to join some other children flying kites nearby, their colorful diamonds dancing against the bright blue sky like exotic birds. Her laughter carried on the autumn breeze, mixing with the sounds of the other children as they ran back and forth, trying to keep their kites aloft. The autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves, distant barbecue smoke, and the faint sweetness of apple cider from the festival booths. "I never thought I'd have this," Elena admitted suddenly, her voice barely above a jibe, whisper. She was picking at the edge of her napkin, shredding it into tiny pieces without seeming to realize what she was doing. "When I was growing up, family picnics were something other people did, something I saw on TV or read about in books. They always seemed like fairy tales to me, too perfect to be real." James nodded slowly, understanding the weight of her words and the courage it took to share them. "Sometimes the best families are the ones we choose for ourselves," he said gently, "the ones that find us when we need them most." Hope began babbling then, a stream of happy sounds that had become more frequent lately as she approached that magical age when babies began to experiment with real words. She reached toward Elena with one hand, then back to James with the other, her face scrunched in concentration as if she were trying to figure out something very important. Her little brow furrowed with effort, and she bounced slightly in James's arms. Duh! Hope's little face suddenly lit up with triumph, as if she'd just solved the greatest puzzle in the world. Dada! The word hung in the air like a bell that had just finished ringing. James froze completely, his entire body going rigid with shock. The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment, all sound fading except for that one word echoing in his ears like a prayer he'd never dared to pray. His heart thundered against his ribs so hard he was certain Elena could hear it. He stared down at the baby in his arms, his daughter, who had just spoken her first word, and chosen to make it about him. Elena's sharp intake of breath broke the spell that had settled over them. James forced himself to look at her, terrified of what he might see in her expression. Would there be anger? Suspicion? The return of that cold wall she'd built around her heart? But instead of any of those things, her face was soft, almost wistful, as if she were watching something beautiful happen rather than something threatening. "Well," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion she was trying to keep in check, "I guess she's made her choice." A small, genuine smile played at the corners of her mouth as she watched Hope pat James's cheek with her tiny hand, babbling happily and repeating her new word with increasing enthusiasm. "Elena, James started, his voice rough with all the things he wanted to say but didn't know how to express. The weight of the moment, the implications, the fear and hope all tangled together in his chest. "It's okay," she whispered, reaching out to touch Hope's small hand, where it rested against James's face. "Sometimes the heart knows things before the head does. Sometimes it knows things we're not ready to admit to ourselves." They sat in comfortable silence for several long minutes, both lost in their own thoughts, while Hope continued to practice her new word with the dedication of a scholar mastering a difficult subject. "Da-da! Da-da!" she announced to the world, as if she wanted everyone in the park to know about her breakthrough. Around them, the Harvest Festival continued its gentle rhythm. Other families packed up their own picnics. Children were called back from their adventures, and the late afternoon sun began to paint everything with a warm golden glow that made the whole scene look like something from a storybook. The sun was starting to sink toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the park, when Elena finally began gathering their things with reluctant movements. Lily had returned, sleepy and grass-stained, her cheeks flushed with fresh air and happiness. She helped pack up the remnants of their picnic, carefully folding the napkins and making sure all the trash went into their bag. "Can we do this again soon?" Lily asked hopefully, looking between Elena and James with bright, expectant eyes. Hope liked it, didn't you, Hope? James walked them slowly to Elena's car, carrying Hope while Elena folded the stroller with practiced efficiency. He wasn't ready for the afternoon to end, wasn't ready to return to the uncertainty of their situation after this perfect pocket of time when everything had felt right and natural and true. As Elena secured Hope into her car seat, she paused, her movements becoming tender and deliberate. She touched her daughter's cheek with gentle fingers, her face soft with love and something that might have been acceptance. "You always know who your heart belongs to, don't you, sweet girl?" she murmured, and James wasn't sure if she was speaking to Hope or to herself. But there was something in her voice, something peaceful and resolved, that made his own heart flutter with hope he hardly dared to acknowledge. James stood in his bathroom, gripping the edges of the worn porcelain sink with white knuckles. The mirror reflected a man he barely recognized. Dark circles, shadowing his eyes like bruises, worry lines etching deep grooves across his forehead. His sandy hair stuck up in unruly tufts, despite multiple attempts to smooth it down. He'd practiced this speech a dozen times already, but the words still felt foreign on his tongue. "Elena, there's something I need to tell you about hope." He shook his head sharply, starting over with more conviction. "Remember when you told me about the sperm donation? Well, His voice cracked and trailed off into the steamy silence. The bathroom felt too small, the walls pressing in around him. Steam from his morning shower still fogged the edges of the antique mirror, a piece he'd inherited from his grandmother that had somehow survived both his military moves and his wife's accident. He wiped it away with his palm, leaving streaky fingerprints on the glass that distorted his already uncertain reflection. Behind him, Lily's collection of bubble bath bottles and rubber ducks lined the edge of the old clawfoot tub like tiny sentinels. Her favorite yellow duck sat perched on the soap dish, wearing a miniature sailor's hat she'd fashioned from construction paper. These small reminders of his daughter's innocence only reinforced why truth mattered so much in their small world. "Just say it straight," he muttered to his reflection, trying to inject his voice with the confidence he'd once commanded in the Marines. "I'm Hope's biological father." The words came out steady, but his hands trembled as he spoke them. The confession hung heavy in the humid air, mixing with the lingering scent of his cheap drugstore shampoo. He'd rehearsed this moment countless times, while folding laundry, during his late-night security rounds, even while reading bedtime stories to Lily. But nothing made it easier. His Marines training had taught him to face challenges head-on, to charge into danger without hesitation. Yet this felt more daunting than any battlefield he'd ever crossed. James straightened his collar with methodical precision, the light blue button-down shirt he saved for special occasions like school, conferences, and job interviews. The fabric still held creases from where he'd pressed it the night before, his hands shaking slightly as he'd worked the iron. He'd even polished his only pair of dress shoes until they gleamed. The clock on his phone showed 9:45 a.m. in stark digital numbers. Elena had agreed to meet him in the office garden at 10, and punctuality was one thing the military had beaten into his bones. 15 minutes to drive across town, 15 minutes to work up the courage he'd been building for weeks. "Daddy?" Lily's bright voice called from the kitchen, cutting through a spiral of anxiety. "Mrs. Dillard's here. She brought homemade cookies." "Coming, sweetheart." He gave himself one last hard look in the mirror, noting how his jaw clenched with determination. "You can do this," he whispered to his reflection, the same words he'd used before every difficult mission overseas. Mrs. Dillard stood in his tiny kitchen, her silver hair perfectly curled despite the early hour. She wore her favorite lavender cardigan and held a plate of chocolate chip cookies that filled the small space with warmth. Lily sat at their wobbly table, already working on her second cookie, chocolate smeared across her cheek like war paint. "James, honey, Mrs. Dillard said, studying his face with those sharp eyes that missed nothing, "you look like a man walking to his own execution. What's got you so wound up?" "Just important conversation today," he managed, grabbing his keys from the counter. The metal felt cold against his sweaty palm. "Well, whatever it is, speak from your heart," she advised, patting his arm with maternal authority. Truth has a way of working itself out, even when it seems impossible. The drive to Elena's office building felt longer than usual, every familiar landmark seeming to stretch the distance. The morning traffic crawled through downtown, each red light stretching for what felt like hours. His hands kept returning to the DNA results, folded carefully in his jacket pocket. The papers that had arrived 3 weeks ago and changed everything. He'd memorized every word, every percentage, every clinical phrase that confirmed what his heart had somehow known from the moment he'd first held hope. The security guard at Elena's building waved him through with a familiar nod and genuine smile. "Morning, James. How's that little girl of yours?" "She's good, thanks, Miguel," James replied, forcing normalcy into his voice. He'd become a regular face here over the past months, no longer the nervous janitor who'd stumbled through conversations with the receptionist. The corporate garden sat nestled behind the main building, a peaceful sanctuary that seemed impossible in the heart of the busy city. Someone had designed it with careful attention to detail, wooden benches positioned to catch the morning sun, flower beds bursting with seasonal blooms, and a small fountain that provided gentle white noise to mask the distant hum of traffic. Elena often came here to think, she'd told him, when the pressures of running a company threatened to overwhelm her carefully constructed composure. He found her already waiting, sitting on their usual bench, the one positioned under the old oak tree that provided perfect shade during summer heat. She wore a deep purple blazer that managed to make her look both powerfully professional and warmly approachable, the color bringing out flecks of gold in her dark eyes. Her hair was pulled back in the practical style she favored for important meetings, but a few rebellious strands had escaped to frame her face. Hope wasn't with her, probably upstairs in the company daycare, charming the staff with her increasingly frequent attempts at words. James. Elena's face lit up with a smile that made his chest tighten with guilt. She stood to greet him, her heels clicking softly against the garden's stone pathway. You're right on time. I was just thinking about how reliable you always are. His carefully prepared speech suddenly felt like sand in his mouth, each rehearsed word crumbling before he could speak them. Elena, Oh, before you start, she interrupted, her eyes dancing with excitement as she reached into her expensive leather bag. I have something for you. I saw this yesterday and thought of you immediately. She pulled out a wrapped package about the size of a hardcover book, the paper elegant cream with a simple silver ribbon. Her fingers had folded the corners with precise care, the way she approached everything important in her life. James's hands felt completely numb as he accepted the gift, as if all feeling had drained from his fingers. The paper crinkled under his touch as he carefully unwrapped it, his movements deliberate and slow. Inside was a silver picture frame, elegant but understated in its simplicity, the kind of quality piece that spoke of thoughtfulness rather than expense. The photo inside made his breath catch in his throat. Hope sat in her favorite yellow dress, the one with tiny daisies that made her look like sunshine itself, giggling at the camera with pure, uninhibited joy. Her dark curls caught the light, and her eyes crinkled at the corners exactly the way his did when he laughed. Below the image, an engraved plate caught the morning light. To my favorite friend. His throat tightened until breathing became a conscious effort. The word friend seemed to pulse and glow before his eyes, each letter carrying the weight of everything unsaid between them. He started again, but Elena's enthusiasm carried her forward like a gentle tide. You've been such a blessing to us, James, she continued, her voice soft with the kind of sincerity that came from deep gratitude. I never thought I could trust anyone with hope the way I trust you. You've shown me what real friendship looks like, the kind that doesn't ask for anything in return. Each word felt like a stone dropping into his stomach, sinking to join the growing weight of his deception. The DNA results in his pocket seemed to burn against his chest like a brand. He could feel them there, folded and refolded until the creases had worn soft, a constant reminder of the truth he carried alone. Elena, he tried one more time, forcing strength into his voice. There's something I really need to. Oh, I'm so sorry. She glanced at the delicate gold watch on her wrist, her expression shifting to mild panic. I completely lost track of time. I have a board meeting in 5 minutes, and if I'm late, Mr. Peterson will spend the entire meeting reminding everyone about punctuality and professionalism. She looked so happy in that moment, so genuinely at peace in a way he'd never seen before. The walls she'd built so carefully around her heart were finally starting to crumble, brick by brick. James thought about Hope's first word, Dada, spoken while reaching for him with tiny, trusting hands. He remembered how Elena had smiled instead of pulling away, how something had shifted in her eyes that day. Of course, he heard himself say, the words coming from somewhere outside his conscious control. It can wait. We'll talk tomorrow morning. Elena squeezed his arm before hurrying back inside, her heels clicking a quick staccato rhythm against the concrete path. She moved with purpose and grace, completely unaware of the bomb he'd chosen not to detonate in their peaceful garden. James stood alone among the carefully tended flowers, holding the framed photo of his daughter, who didn't know she was his daughter. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting shifting shadows through the oak leaves above. A bee hummed lazily among the roses, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed 10 o'clock. The walk back to his truck felt like moving through thick mud, each step requiring conscious effort and determination. His legs felt heavy, weighted down by the burden of carrying this secret for another day. He clicked his key fob with a thumb that seemed to belong to someone else, hearing the familiar double beep of his old Ford unlocking. Once inside the cab, James set the photo carefully on the passenger seat where the morning light could catch it just right. Hope's smile seemed to shine even brighter against the worn fabric, a beacon of innocence in his world of complicated truths. His hands found the steering wheel and gripped it until his knuckles turned white, the familiar texture of the worn vinyl providing an anchor in his swirling thoughts. The guilt pressed down on his chest like a physical weight, making each breath a deliberate action. He could still feel the folded paper in his pocket, the scientific proof that would change everything between them. The garden's flowers swayed gently outside his window, oblivious to his internal struggle, their bright colors mocking his dark mood. A cardinal landed on the hood of his truck with a soft thump, its bright red feathers brilliant against the faded blue paint. The bird cocked its head, studying him through the windshield for a long moment before spreading its wings and disappearing into the oak tree above. Even nature seemed to be offering him signs he couldn't interpret. James's fingers tightened on the wheel until they ached, his wedding ring, which he still couldn't bring himself to remove, digging into his skin. The morning sun continued its climb, casting everything in golden light that made Hope's photograph seem to glow with its own inner radiance. Tomorrow, he promised himself. Tomorrow, he would find the courage to tell Elena the truth that would either bring them together or tear apart the fragile trust they'd built. But today, he would let her hold on to the happiness he'd seen shining in her eyes, even if it meant carrying this burden alone for one more night. The morning sun streamed through Elena's office windows, casting long shadows across her pristine desk. She scrolled through emails on her laptop, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. Hope lay sleeping in her carrier nearby, making tiny sounds in her dreams. A knock at the door made Elena look up. Sarah, her assistant, stood in the doorway with an unusual expression, a mix of concern and hesitation that immediately set Elena on edge. "Miss Marston, there's something you need to see," Sarah said, her voice low. She held a partially burned piece of paper in her latex-gloved hands. The cleaning crew found this in Mr. Holloway's workspace while emptying the trash. It didn't burn completely. Elena's heart skipped a beat. She gestured for Sarah to come closer, careful not to wake Hope. Taking the scorched document, she saw the letterhead of a prominent DNA testing facility. Her eyes widened as she scanned the remaining legible text. Subject A, 99.9% probability of biological relation to Subject B. Her hands began to shake. Collection date matches. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. She recognized Hope's birthday, the reference numbers that matched her medical records. The room suddenly felt too small, too warm. Elena stood up, steadying herself against her desk. "How long have you had this?" "I found it this morning," Sarah replied softly. "I thought you should know right away." Elena nodded mechanically, her mind racing through every interaction with James over the past months. The way he looked at Hope, his gentle touch, the lullabies, Hope's first word, "Dada." It all made horrible sense now. "Watch Hope," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded, moving to stand near the sleeping baby. Elena's heels clicked against the tile floor as she made her way to the employee break room, where James usually took his morning coffee. Her chest felt tight, each breath a conscious effort. The betrayal cut deep, deeper than she'd thought possible after years of keeping people at arm's length. She found him exactly where she expected, sitting alone at the small table by the window, his familiar travel mug, her gift, steaming before him. He looked up as she entered, his usual warm smile fading as he saw her expression. "Elena?" He started to stand. "Don't." Her voice was ice. She held up the burned paper, watching as all color drained from his face. "When were you going to tell me about this?" James sank back into his chair, his shoulders slumping. I was trying to find the right way." "The right way?" Elena's laugh was bitter. "You've had weeks, James. Weeks of coming into my daughter's life, holding her, singing to her, knowing she was yours." Her voice cracked on the last word. "I wanted to tell you that day in the garden," he said quietly. "But when you gave me that picture—" "Stop!" Elena held up her hand. "Just stop." "You had every chance to tell me." She took a shaky breath, fighting to maintain her composure. Every morning, every interaction, it was all based on a lie. "No." James stood up quickly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Everything I felt, everything I did, it was real. I care about Hope, and don't you dare." Elena cut him off, taking a step back. "You don't get to talk about feelings when you've been deceiving me this entire time." Her voice rose slightly, drawing curious glances from passing employees. James ran a hand through his hair, his distress evident. "I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid of losing what we had built. Afraid of how you'd react. I know I should have told you immediately, but I didn't know how to say it without destroying everything." "And this is better?" Elena gestured with the burned paper. Finding out from half-destroyed test results that you tried to burn? Do you know what this feels like? Her voice trembled. To realize that someone you trusted, maybe the only person you've truly trusted in years, has been hiding something this massive? James took a step toward her, his eyes pleading. Elena, please, let me explain properly. Hope deserves better than this, Elena interrupted. She squared her shoulders, falling back on the protective armor she'd worn for years. You're fired, Mr. Holloway. Clear out your things by the end of the day. James stood frozen, the words hitting him like physical blows. Elena. But she was already turning away, her heels clicking rapidly against the floor as she hurried back to her office. She could feel tears threatening to fall, but held them back through sheer will. When she reached her office, she gathered Hope into her arms, holding her close, breathing in her baby scent. Sarah hovered uncertainly by the door. Miss Marston, should I call HR? Yes, Elena said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Have them process Mr. Holloway's termination immediately. She turned to the window, hope warm against her chest, as James's test results fell from her trembling fingers to the floor. James drove home in a daze, barely registering the familiar streets and stop signs. The afternoon sun felt too bright, almost mocking. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white, but he couldn't feel them anymore. Elena's words kept echoing in his mind. You're fired. When he pulled into the apartment complex's parking lot, Mrs. Dillard was already waiting outside with Lily. His daughter's face lit up at the sight of his truck, but her smile faded when she saw his expression. Daddy? Lily asked as he walked up. You're home early. Mrs. Dillard sensed something was wrong. She squeezed Lily's shoulder and quietly excused herself, leaving father and daughter alone. Inside their apartment, James sank heavily onto their worn couch. Lily stood in front of him, clutching her backpack to her chest. Did something bad happen? James tried to steady his voice. I won't be working at the daycare anymore, sweetheart. But what about Hope? Lily's lower lip trembled. And Miss Elena? They. James swallowed hard. They need someone else now. Lily's face crumpled. Tears welled up in her big brown eyes. But Hope needs you. You're her special friend. You sing to her. She dropped her backpack and climbed onto the couch, wrapping her arms around his neck. Can't you tell them you're sorry? Even if you did something wrong? James held his daughter close, feeling her small body shake with sobs. Sometimes saying sorry isn't enough, Lily pad. His own tears threatened to fall, but he held them back. He had to be strong for her. The days that followed passed in a gray blur. James called in sick to his night job for the first time in 5 years. He couldn't bear to walk those halls, knowing Hope and Elena wouldn't be there in the morning. Lily grew quieter, her usual chatter replaced by worried glances at her father. On Sunday morning, when Lily appeared in her church dress ready to go, James couldn't move from the couch. Not today, sweetie, he managed. Why? Don't we watch some movies instead? The guitar in the corner gathered dust. James couldn't look at it without remembering Hope's delighted giggles, the way her tiny hands reached for the strings. Even his morning coffee tasted bitter in the travel mug Elena had given him. Mrs. Dillard brought over casseroles, her concerned eyes taking in James's unshaven face and wrinkled clothes. Whatever it is, she said gently, this too shall pass. But James wasn't sure. He'd lost not just a job, but a connection to his daughter. A daughter he might never see again. The weight of his secret felt heavier now that he couldn't even try to make it right. Lily left drawings around the apartment, stick figures of their family, always including Hope and Elena. She'd fold them into paper airplanes and sail them toward her father, trying to make him smile. Sometimes she'd curl up next to him on the couch, her small hand finding his, offering comfort in the way children do, purely and without question. A week passed, then another. James forced himself to return to his night job, moving through the motions like a ghost. The other janitors noticed but didn't ask. They just worked around his silence, understanding that some pains need space to breathe. One afternoon, while Lily was at school, James found himself holding his phone, thumb hovering over Elena's contact. He'd typed and deleted 100 messages, each one inadequate. How could he explain that his silence came from love, not deceit? That he'd been trying to protect everyone, even if he'd failed miserably? The mail slot rattled, breaking his thoughts. Among the bills and advertisements lay a cream-colored envelope with the Bright Steps logo. His hand shook as he opened it. Inside was an invitation to the Veterans Day ceremony, printed on thick paper with gold embossing. The event was scheduled for next week, a celebration of service members and their families. James almost tossed it aside, but something made him turn it over. There, in neat handwriting he recognized as Olivia's, were 3 simple words: "Please come." James sat at the kitchen table, staring at those words until they blurred. Hope's first word, "Dada," echoed in his memory, along with Elena's soft observation, "You always know who your heart belongs to." The invitation trembled in his hands as the weight of the past weeks pressed down on him. He'd lost his wife, survived war, raised Lily alone, but this pain was different. This was about a chance at healing he might have forever ruined with his silence. James sat at his kitchen table, turning the invitation over and over in his calloused hands. The paper had become soft at the edges from his constant handling. Sunlight streamed through the window, highlighting the handwritten words that had haunted him for days. "Please come." "Dad, you've been staring at that paper forever," Lily said, pushing her cereal bowl aside. Her dark hair was still messy from sleep, but her eyes were sharp and focused. "Are we going or not?" James sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, sweetie. It's complicated." Grown-ups always say that. Lily slid off her chair and came to stand beside him. She placed her small hand on his arm. "But it's not complicated. Hope misses you. I can tell Elena misses you too." "How would you know that?" James asked, surprised by his daughter's certainty. "Because she wrote please," Lily said simply, pointing to the invitation. "And because she's giving you a second chance. That's what Mrs. Rodriguez taught us in school. Everyone deserves a second chance." James looked at his daughter, feeling a surge of pride at her wisdom. Sometimes he forgot how perceptive children could be, how they could cut through adult confusion with simple truths. "When did you get so smart?" he asked, pulling her into a hug. "I've always been smart," she giggled. "You just haven't been paying attention." The morning of the ceremony arrived, crisp and clear. James stood before his mirror, adjusting his tie for the 10th time. He'd pulled his old dress uniform from the closet, and though it felt strange to wear it again, there was comfort in its familiar weight. "You look handsome, Dad," Lily said from his doorway. She wore her favorite blue dress, the one with tiny white flowers. "Like a real hero." James swallowed hard. "I don't feel much like a hero lately." "Then maybe today's your chance to be one again," she replied, taking his hand. The drive to Bright Steps seemed longer than usual. James's heart pounded as they pulled into the parking lot, which was fuller than he'd ever seen it. Parents, children, and staff members milled about outside, many wearing red, white, and blue. Olivia, the daycare manager, spotted them immediately. "James, Lily!" She hurried over, enveloping them both in warm hugs. "I'm so glad you came. We've missed you around here." Inside, the main playroom had been transformed. Rows of chairs faced a small stage decorated with American flags and patriotic bunting. Children's artwork covered the walls, crayon drawings of flags, soldiers, and what looked like families holding hands. James and Lily found seats near the back. He scanned the room, but couldn't see Elena or Hope anywhere. His stomach churned with nervous energy. The ceremony began with a welcome from Olivia, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance, led by the pre-kindergarten class. A group of toddlers sang, "You're a grand old flag," though most of them seemed more interested in waving their little flags than staying on key. Then Elena stepped onto the stage. James's breath caught in his throat. She looked different somehow, softer, more vulnerable than he'd ever seen her. She wore a simple blue dress, her dark hair falling in gentle waves around her shoulders. In her arms, Hope wore a tiny red dress with white stars. "Good morning, everyone," Elena began, her voice steady but gentle. "Today is about honoring service, not just to our country, but to each other. It's about recognizing the quiet heroes who make our world better, often without recognition or reward." She paused, and her eyes found James in the crowd. Sometimes heroes come in unexpected forms. Sometimes they wear uniforms, and sometimes they wear janitor's coveralls. Sometimes they fight on battlefields far away, and sometimes they fight battles closer to home, like teaching a lonely baby to trust, or helping a guarded mother learn to open her heart. James felt Lily squeeze his hand. Around him, people were turning in their seats, following Elena's gaze. "James Holloway served our country as a Marine Corps medic," Elena continued. "But his service didn't end when he came home. Every day, he brings that same dedication and compassion to everything he does, whether it's raising his amazing daughter Lily, or," her voice wavered slightly, "or showing a scared single mother that family can come in many forms." Hope chose that moment to babble data into the microphone, causing ripples of gentle laughter through the audience. Elena smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "James," she said, looking directly at him now, "would you please come up here? Hope needs you." She took a deep breath. "So do I." The room fell silent. James felt frozen in place until Lily gave him a gentle push. "Go on, Dad," she whispered. "Be a hero." Standing on shaky legs, James made his way toward the stage. Each step felt like walking through deep water, but with each one, his vision grew clearer. He could see Hope reaching for him. Her little face lit up with joy. He could see Elena's eyes, full of forgiveness and something more, something that looked a lot like hope. He reached the first step of the stage, his heart pounding in his ears. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Bright Steps garden as Elena and James walked side by side along the winding brick path. The November air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and late-blooming chrysanthemums. Hope dozed contentedly in Elena's arms, her tiny fingers curled around the edge of her yellow blanket. James kept his hands in his pockets, his heart thundering against his chest. The ceremony had left him raw with emotion, Elena's public forgiveness still echoing in his ears. Neither had spoken since leaving the crowded assembly hall, letting the quiet of the garden envelope them. Elena stopped near a wooden bench beneath an old maple tree. Its remaining leaves glowed like amber in the setting sun. "Would you like to sit?" she asked, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. James nodded, settling onto the bench as Elena sat beside him, adjusting Hope in her lap. The baby stirred but didn't wake, her peaceful breathing a gentle rhythm between them. "I owe you an apology," Elena began, her fingers absently stroking Hope's dark curls. "My reaction, it wasn't just about you keeping the truth from me." She paused, drawing a shaky breath. "It was about control, always has been." James turned slightly toward her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "I understand that now. I should have told you right away, but I was scared too." "Scared?" Elena's eyebrows lifted in surprise. "You're probably the bravest person I know." A sad smile crossed James's face. "Bravery isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing the right thing despite the fear." He looked down at his hands. "I failed at that. I let my fear of losing Hope and you keep me from being honest." Elena shifted Hope gently in her arms. "You know what terrified me most? She didn't wait for his answer. How natural it felt, seeing you with her. How quickly she bonded with you, even before either of us knew the truth." Her voice cracked slightly. "I've spent my whole life building walls, James, making sure I never needed anyone. Then you come along, and suddenly, the walls don't feel so necessary anymore?" James finished quietly. "Exactly." Elena brushed away a tear with her free hand. "When I found out about the DNA test, it felt like everything was spinning out of control, like the careful life I'd built was being pulled apart." "I never meant to destroy what you built," James said earnestly. "I just wanted to be part of it, somehow, even before I knew about Hope being." He trailed off, still uncertain how to define their connection. "Being your daughter," Elena finished firmly. "She is, James, biologically and, more importantly, in her heart." She looked down at Hope's sleeping face. "I think she knew before any of us did." James felt his throat tighten. "I want to do this right, Elena. No more secrets. No more hiding behind fear. Hope deserves better than that, we all do." Elena nodded slowly. "I agree, but I need you to understand something." She turned to face him fully. "I'm not good at letting people in. I've spent 40 years learning how not to trust, how not to need anyone. It's going to take time for me to unlearn those habits. We can take it slow," James assured her. "One day at a time. I'm not going anywhere." "Promise?" The vulnerability in her voice made his heart ache. "I promise. Whatever this becomes, however long it takes, I'll be here for Hope and—" He hesitated before adding softly, "for you too, if you'll let me." As if on cue, Hope stirred in Elena's arms, her eyes fluttering open. She looked around dreamily before focusing on James. Her face broke into a bright, gummy smile, and she reached out her tiny hands toward him. "Da-da," she exclaimed clearly, with complete certainty this time. Elena's breath caught, but instead of tension, James saw acceptance wash over her face. She gently transferred Hope into his waiting arms. "Hey there, sweet girl," James whispered, his voice thick with emotion as Hope snuggled against his chest. He looked at Elena, seeing tears in her eyes that matched his own. "She's right, you know," Elena said quietly. "You are her dad, not just because of biology, but because of every morning you spent singing to her, every time you protected her, Every moment you loved her, even when you weren't sure if you had the right to. Hope babbled happily between them, reaching up to pat James's cheek with her tiny hand. The simple gesture held more healing than any words could have conveyed. "Thank you," James managed to say, though the words felt inadequate for the gift she was giving him. Elena smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and softened every careful line of her face. "We'll figure this out together," she said, reaching over to smooth Hope's curls. "All of us." The following Monday, James stood at Bright Step's front entrance, his work badge feeling different somehow against his chest. Olivia greeted him with a warm smile as she unlocked the door. "Welcome back, James. The music room's been too quiet without you." Inside, the familiar morning routines of the daycare felt both old and new. The soft whir of the heating system, the gentle clicks of lights warming up, and the faint scent of cleaning supplies, all of it wrapped around him like a comfortable sweater. Elena arrived at 7 with Hope, who squealed at the sight of James. Her tiny hands reached for him immediately. "Someone's happy to see you," Elena said, adjusting her laptop bag. She handed Hope over with practiced ease. "I have an 8 o'clock meeting, but maybe lunch later?" James nodded, bouncing Hope gently. "I'd like that." As the weeks passed, their lunch meetings became a regular thing. Every Tuesday and Thursday, they'd sit in Elena's office or, when weather permitted, in the garden. Sometimes they talked about Hope's development, her growing vocabulary, her first wobbly attempts at walking. Other times, they shared pieces of themselves. "I used to think being alone was safer," Elena admitted one day, picking at her sandwich. "Build the walls high enough, and nothing can hurt you." James understood. "After Sarah died, I did the same thing. Lily was the only one who could really get through." "Lily's special that way," Elena said, smiling. "She has this gift of seeing right into people's hearts." Speaking of Lily, she blossomed in her new role as Hope's big sister. Every other weekend, Elena would bring Hope to James's apartment, where Lily had transformed her craft corner into a baby-friendly zone. She'd spread out soft blankets and arrange her stuffed animals in a protective circle around Hope. "Look, Hope," Lily would exclaim, showing her latest crayon masterpiece. "This is all of us at the park." The drawings always featured 4 figures now, 2 tall, 2 small, holding hands under a bright yellow sun. One particularly memorable Saturday, James was preparing lunch while Elena sat cross-legged on the living room floor, watching the girls. Lily was reading a picture book to Hope, who sat captivated in Elena's lap. And then, Lily narrated dramatically, "The butterfly found its way home." She flapped her, arms like wings, making Hope giggle uncontrollably. James paused in the kitchen doorway, taking in the scene. Elena caught his eye and smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and softened all her sharp edges. These moments began to stack up like precious photographs. Hope taking her first steps in the daycare playground, running straight into James's waiting arms while Elena filmed on her phone. Lily teaching Hope to high-five during lunch breaks. Elena surprising them with cupcakes on Lily's birthday, each one decorated with tiny butterflies because she remembered Lily's favorite book. The daycare staff noticed the change too. Olivia would hide her knowing smile when Elena lingered during drop-offs, asking James about his weekend plans or sharing funny stories about Hope's latest adventures. One Wednesday morning, while James was setting up the music room, Elena appeared in the doorway with 2 coffee cups. "I thought you might need this," she said, handing him his old travel mug. "Hope kept us both up last night with that tooth coming in." "Us both?" James raised an eyebrow, accepting the coffee. Elena shrugged, but her eyes were warm. "Well, you're the one who taught me that humming You Are My Sunshine works better than any teething toy." Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and neither pulled away immediately. The touch was brief but electric, carrying the weight of all their shared moments, all their careful steps toward each other. Later that afternoon, they sat together on a bench outside, watching Hope toddle between them on sturdy legs. The autumn breeze rustled through the remaining leaves, and Hope squealed with delight as they danced through the air. "James?" Elena's voice was soft. "Thank you for not giving up on us. On Hope. On." She paused, reaching across the space between them. Their hands found each other, fingers intertwining naturally, like they'd done this 1,000 times before. For 3 heartbeats, they stayed, connected, acknowledging something new and fragile growing between them. Then Hope wobbled, and they both moved to catch her, their hands separating as naturally as they'd come together. But the moment lingered in the autumn air, as real as the leaves crunching beneath their feet. The Sunday morning dawned crisp and clear, with golden sunlight streaming through scattered clouds. James adjusted his tie in the hallway mirror while Lily twirled in her favorite yellow dress. His hands trembled slightly as he smoothed down his freshly pressed shirt. It had been years since he'd worn his Sunday best. "Do I look okay, sweetheart?" James asked Lily, who nodded enthusiastically. "You look handsome, Daddy, like a prince." She grinned, revealing a missing front tooth. The drive to Elena's house was quiet, filled with the kind of nervous energy that made James tap his fingers against the steering wheel. When they pulled into her driveway, Elena was already waiting outside, Hope bundled in a tiny white dress with matching bow. The sight made James's heart skip a beat. Elena looked different today, softer somehow. She wore a simple blue dress that made her eyes shine, and her usual straightened hair fell in natural waves around her shoulders. Hope squealed with delight when she saw James's truck. "Good morning," Elena said, her voice carrying a hint of uncertainty as James helped her secure Hope's car seat. "I haven't been to church since." "Well, I can't remember when." "Pastor Reynolds gives good sermons," James replied softly. "Nothing too heavy. Just honest talk about life and hope." The drive to church was filled with Lily's cheerful chatter and Hope's occasional babbling. Elena sat quietly in the passenger seat, her hands folded in her lap, watching the suburban streets roll by. The little white church stood proudly against the morning sky, its steeple reaching toward heaven like a finger pointing the way. The parking lot was already filling up with families in, their Sunday finest. James found a spot near the back, under an old oak tree. "It's beautiful," Elena whispered, gazing at the stained glass windows that threw rainbow patterns across the ground. As they walked toward the entrance, Hope secure in Elena's arms and Lily, skipping ahead, Pastor Reynolds stood at the door greeting his congregation. His weathered face broke into a warm smile when he saw them. "James, it's been too long," he said, clasping James's hand. His kind eyes turned to Elena. "And you must be Elena. Welcome to our little family." Inside, the wooden pews gleamed with decades of polish, and morning light streamed through the colored windows. They found seats near the middle, where Hope could watch the choir without being too close to the speakers. The organ music filled the space with familiar hymns that made James's chest tighten with memories. Elena sat very still as the service began, her shoulders gradually relaxing as the congregation's friendly energy wrapped around them. Hope remained surprisingly calm, content to play with the soft toy lamb Elena had brought along. When Pastor Reynolds took his place at the pulpit, his sermon focused on forgiveness, not just of others, but of ourselves. James noticed Elena's breath catch as the pastor spoke about how the hardest walls to break down are often the ones we build ourselves. Sometimes, Pastor Reynolds said, his voice gentle but firm, the greatest act of courage is letting someone else in. Trust isn't about never being hurt. It's about believing that love is worth the risk. James saw Elena wipe quickly at her eyes, and without thinking, he reached over and squeezed her hand. To his surprise, she didn't pull away. Instead, she laced her fingers through his, holding on as if his touch was keeping her anchored. The rest of the service passed in a blur of hymns and prayers, with Hope occasionally joining in with happy sounds that made nearby parishioners smile. When the final blessing was given, Elena remained seated for a moment, still holding James's hand. As the congregation filed out into the bright late morning sun, Elena turned to James in the parking lot. Hope was balanced on her hip, playing with her mother's necklace. "Thank you," Elena said softly. "I didn't realize how much I needed this. Not just the service, but..." She gestured vaguely at the space between them. "All of it." James stepped closer, drawn by something in her eyes he'd never seen before, a vulnerability that matched his own. "Elena, She moved first, rising slightly on her toes. Their lips met in a kiss that felt like coming home, gentle, warm, and full of unspoken understanding. Hope, caught between them, patted both their cheeks with her tiny hands. When they pulled apart, a flock of sparrows took flight from the old oak tree, wheeling against the blue sky. Hope's delighted clapping echoed across the parking lot as she watched the birds soar overhead, her laughter pure and free. Elena's eyes were bright with unshed tears as she watched their daughter's joy. "Maybe," she whispered, "this is what healing feels like." The birds circled once more before disappearing into the distance, leaving behind a moment suspended in time, a family finding their way back to wholeness, one Sunday morning at a time. The late summer breeze carried the sweet scent of barbecue smoke across Thompson Park. James stood at the old brick grill, carefully flipping hamburgers while keeping one eye on Hope, who sat contentedly in her portable high chair nearby. The toddler clutched her favorite stuffed giraffe, occasionally offering it imaginary bites of her Cheerios. "Need any help there, Chef?" Elena approached, carrying a bowl of fresh fruit salad. She traded her usual business attire for casual jeans and a soft blue t-shirt that made her eyes sparkle. "I think I've got it under control," James replied with a warm smile, "though I wouldn't say no to some expert taste testing." Lily raced past them, her sandals kicking up wood chips as she made another circuit of the playground. "Miss E!" she called out, waving frantically. "Watch how high I can swing!" Elena set down the fruit bowl and gave Lily a thumbs up. "Show me what you've got, sweetie." The way she said it so natural, so maternal, made James's heart swell. "She's really taken to you," James said softly, pressing a burger with his spatula. The meat sizzled satisfyingly. "The feeling's mutual." Elena pulled a paper plate from their picnic supplies. "It's nice, you know, being Miss E. Much better than Miss Marston or Ma'am." Hope squealed and dropped her giraffe. Before either adult could move, Lily had already darted over from the swings to retrieve it. "Here you go, baby sister," she said, making silly faces until Hope giggled. James caught Elena's eye, seeing his own emotions reflected their joy, gratitude, and maybe something deeper neither of them was quite ready to name. The past few months had changed everything. What started as careful co-parenting had grown into genuine friendship and, well, maybe more. "Burgers are ready," James announced, stacking the perfectly grilled patties on a platter. "Lily, honey, come help set the table." They gathered around the weathered picnic table, passing condiments and fixing plates. Elena helped Hope with tiny bites of hamburger, while Lily chatted excitedly about her upcoming school play. "And Miss E said she'd help me practice my lines," Lily announced proudly between bites. "She does all the funny voices way better than Daddy." "Hey now," James protested with mock offense. "I'll have you know my dramatic reading of The Three Little Pigs is legendary." Elena laughed, a real laugh that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "A good man with many talents," she said, touching his arm briefly. "Though perhaps voice acting isn't your strongest suit." The simple praise warmed him more than the afternoon sun. James watched as Elena wiped ketchup from Hope's chin with practiced ease, no trace left of the uncertain mother she'd been just months ago. After lunch, they spread a checkered blanket on the grass. Hope practiced her wobbly walking, holding tight to James's fingers, while Elena and Lily built daisy chains. The scene felt so natural, so right, like puzzle pieces finally clicking into place. "We should take a picture," Lily suggested suddenly, "to remember today." Elena pulled out her phone. "That's a wonderful idea. Here, I can set the timer." No, Lily insisted. "You have to be in it too, Miss E. We can ask that nice lady over there to take it." Before anyone could object, Lily had already run to a nearby grandmother, who smiled and agreed to help. James settled on the blanket with Hope on one knee and Lily on the other. After a moment's hesitation, Elena sat beside him, close enough that he could smell her light floral perfume. "Everyone say cheese," the grandmother called out. "Cheese!" They chorused. Hope babbled something that might have been an attempt to join in. The camera clicked, capturing the moment James with both girls on his lap, Elena leaning in close, all of them smiling, genuine smiles that reached their eyes. When Elena checked the photo, she paused, staring at it longer than necessary. "It's perfect," she whispered, and James knew she wasn't just talking about the composition. They stayed at the park until the sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the grass. Hope had fallen asleep in her stroller, and Lily was making one last trip down the slide. James helped Elena pack up the cooler, their hands brushing occasionally as they worked together with comfortable familiarity. "Thank you for suggesting this," Elena said as she folded the blanket. "It's been really nice." "We should do it more often," James replied, carefully keeping his tone casual despite the hope rising in his chest. Elena nodded, watching Lily run back toward them. "I'd like that," she said softly. "We'd all like that very much." James sat on the edge of his bed early Sunday morning, the pale dawn light filtering through his curtains. An old cardboard box labeled Sarah's Things rested beside him, collecting dust from years of being tucked away in his closet. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted the lid. The familiar scent of his late wife's perfume drifted up, fainter now but still present, bringing with it a flood of memories. Pictures, letters, and small mementos filled the box. Pieces of a life cut too short. But today, he wasn't looking for memories. He was searching for something specific. "It has to be in here somewhere," he murmured, carefully moving aside a folded wedding dress and several photo albums. His fingers brushed against something small and velvet at the bottom of the box. James pulled out a tiny navy blue box, its surface worn smooth from years of handling. He remembered the day Sarah had given it to him, just weeks before the accident. "James," she had said, pressing it into his palm, "this was my grandmother's ring. Mom gave it to me before she passed, and now I want you to have it." Her eyes had been bright with certainty. "Someday, when you find someone who heals your broken heart, give her this ring. Promise me." He had laughed then, kissing her forehead. "I'll never need it," he'd said. "You're stuck with me forever." Now, sitting in the quiet of his bedroom, James opened the box. The ring was simple but elegant, a delicate band of white gold with a small diamond surrounded by tiny sapphires. It caught the morning light, sending blue sparkles dancing across his wall. "Daddy?" Lily's voice came from the doorway. She stood there in her Sunday dress, her hair half braided. "I need help finishing my hair." James quickly closed the box and slipped it into his pocket. "Coming, sweetheart." He crossed the room and knelt behind her, his fingers working carefully through her dark hair. "You excited to see Miss E and Hope at church today?" "Yeah." Lily bounced a little, making him chuckle as he tried to keep the braid straight. "Hope's starting to walk better now. Elena says she might be running soon." The ring box felt heavy in his pocket as he finished Lily's braid. Elena, the woman who had somehow slipped past all his defenses, who made his heart beat faster, even now. The woman who had forgiven him when he'd hidden the truth about Hope, who was slowly learning to trust and love alongside him. At church, James sat in their usual pew with Lily beside him. When Elena arrived with Hope, the baby immediately reached for him with grabby hands, squealing, "Dada!" Elena handed her over with a soft smile that made his heart skip. Throughout the service, James was acutely aware of the box in his pocket. He found himself unable to focus on Pastor Mike's sermon about grace and new beginnings. Instead, his mind kept wandering to Elena beside him, to the way she gently bounced Hope on her knee, to how natural it felt having her there. After the service, they lingered in the church garden while Lily played with some other children near the fountain. Hope had fallen asleep in her stroller, leaving James and Elena alone on a wooden bench beneath an old oak tree. "You seemed distracted during the sermon," Elena observed, her hand finding his. "Everything okay?" "Just thinking," he replied, squeezing her fingers gently. Elena shifted closer, her free hand reaching into his jacket pocket. Before he could stop her, her fingers found the velvet box. Her eyes widened slightly as she pulled it out. James felt his heart racing. "Elena, I." She opened the box carefully, her breath catching at the sight of the ring. The sunlight filtering through the leaves above them made the sapphires sparkle. "It was Sarah's grandmother's," he explained quietly. "Sarah gave it to me before the accident. She told me to give it to whoever helped heal my heart." Elena's eyes met his, filled with understanding and something deeper. She started to speak, but James gently took the box from her hands. "Not yet," he said softly, closing it. "We're still learning, still healing, still becoming who we need to be for each other and for our girls." He tucked the box back into his pocket. "But someday." Elena's smile was radiant as she leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. "When we're ready," she whispered. The moment was interrupted by Hope's babbling as she woke from her nap. Both adults turned to the stroller, where their daughter was reaching up with both hands, wanting to be held. James watched as Elena lifted her out, and his heart felt full enough to burst. The ring box sat in his pocket, a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Not today, but someday, when they were ready, when the timing was right. For now, this was enough. This gentle understanding between them, this slow-growing love that was healing them both. Lily ran over from the fountain, her Sunday, shoes slightly damp from splashing. "Can we get ice cream?" she asked hopefully. "Please?" James looked at Elena, who was already nodding. This was their family now. Not perfect, not traditional, but real and warm and growing stronger every day. The ring would wait. They had all the time in the world. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Bright Steps Early Learning Center, casting warm patches of light across the colorfully decorated playroom. Bright balloons in pink and purple bobbed against the ceiling, while streamers twisted and danced in the gentle breeze from the air conditioning. A hand-painted banner proclaimed, "Happy second birthday, Hope." In rainbow letters, clearly the work of small, loving hands, Lily had insisted on making it herself. James stood near the snack table, adjusting the placement of perfectly frosted cupcakes. Each one wore a tiny crown of pink frosting with a single sparkling candle waiting to be lit. His hands moved with precise care, the Same gentleness he'd shown that first night he'd held Hope in his arms. "Daddy!" Hope's clear voice rang out as she toddled toward him, her dark curls bouncing with each determined step. She'd inherited Elena's hair, but her eyes, those were unmistakably his, a fact that still caught him off guard sometimes. James scooped her up, and she immediately grabbed for his nose, their familiar game. "Birthday girl!" he exclaimed, spinning her once before settling her on his hip. "Are you excited for your party?" "Party!" Hope echoed, clapping her small hands together. She wore a pale yellow dress that Elena had picked out, with tiny daisies embroidered along the hem. A matching bow struggled to contain her curls, already working its way loose. Elena appeared in the doorway, carrying a stack of paper plates and napkins. Her usual business attire had been swapped for casual jeans and a soft blue sweater, and her face held the relaxed smile that had become more common over the past months. "The other parents are starting to arrive," she announced, setting down her supplies. "Olivia's bringing in the rest of the kids from the playground." As if on cue, the room began filling with the happy chaos of toddlers and their parents. Lily darted between groups, proud in her self-appointed role as party helper, directing everyone to the craft table she'd helped set up. Mrs. Dillard, who'd insisted on coming to help, arranged juice boxes with military precision. The morning passed in a blur of activities. Finger painting, a puppet show performed by some of the older kids, and a rousing round of head, shoulders, knees, and toes that left everyone giggling. Hope moved through it all like a tiny queen, accepting hugs and presents with a graciousness that made both her parents proud. Finally, it was time for cake. The children gathered around the table, their faces glowing with anticipation as Elena carefully lit the candles on Hope's special cupcake. James held Hope on his lap while everyone sang "Happy Birthday," her small body wiggling with excitement. "Make a wish, sweetheart," Elena encouraged, helping Hope lean forward. With a mighty puff of breath and a little help from James, she blew out her candle. The room erupted in cheers and applause. As the cupcakes were being distributed, Olivia stepped forward with James's old guitar, the one that still lived in the music room. "I think," she said with a knowing smile, "it's time for a special birthday song." James felt his heart skip a beat. This wasn't just any song, it was their song, the lullaby that had started everything. He settled the guitar in his lap, Hope still perched contentedly against him, her face smeared with pink frosting. The room quieted as he began to strum the familiar chords. The melody was simple, a gentle country tune his mother had sung to him, that he'd sung to Lily, and that had somehow brought him to Hope. His voice, warm and clear, filled the room. "Little star, don't you cry. Angels watch you from the sky. Close your eyes and rest your head. Sweet dreams wait in your bed." As he began the second verse, another voice joined his. Elena's. She stepped closer, her hand resting on Hope's back, her voice blending perfectly with his. "Morning sun will rise again, bringing love that never ends. In my arms, you're safe and sound. Peace and joy with you I've found." James looked up to meet Elena's eyes, finding them bright with tears that matched his own. Hope leaned back against his chest, her small hand reaching up to pat his cheek as they finished the song together. The room was silent for a moment before breaking into soft applause. "Again," Hope demanded, making everyone laugh. Elena wiped her eyes quickly, but her smile remained. "How about we open presents first, sweetie?" she suggested, running her fingers through Hope's curls. "Then maybe Daddy will sing it again later." The word Daddy still held such weight, such joy. James remembered when Elena had first suggested Hope call him that officially. It had been a Tuesday morning, completely ordinary except for how it had changed everything. Now it felt as natural as breathing. They moved to the present table, Hope bouncing between them as she tore into wrapped packages with typical toddler enthusiasm. Each gift earned genuine thanks, coached gently by Elena, who'd been teaching Hope the importance of gratitude since she could talk. As the party began winding down, with parents gathering their tired but happy children, James caught Elena watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. She moved closer, speaking softly so only he could hear. "You know," she said, her hand finding his, "that lullaby changed everything. I used to think I had to do it all alone, that it was safer that way." She paused, watching Hope show Lily her new toys. "But hearing you sing to her that first night, it was like something clicked into place, something I didn't even know was not missing." James squeezed her hand gently, remembering that night with perfect clarity, the quiet halls, the crying baby, the simple act of comfort that had altered the course of all their lives. "You'll always be her father," Elena continued, her voice full of certainty and something more, something that made his heart race. "And mine?" She turned to face him fully, her eyes meeting his with unwavering warmth. "Someday." The morning sun cast long shadows across Pine Grove Cemetery as James's truck stopped along the quiet path. Fallen leaves crunched underfoot as they emerged. James first, then Elena holding Hope, nearly 2.5, her dark curls catching the golden light. Lily walked beside them, clutching white daisies she'd picked that morning, each stem carefully chosen with the serious attention only a child could give such an important task. The cemetery stretched in peaceful, quiet, weathered headstones standing sentinel among towering oaks and maples. The air carried autumn's crisp scent mixed with fallen leaves and late-blooming flowers. "Are you sure about this?" Elena asked softly, adjusting Hope as the toddler twisted to look around with curious eyes. Her free hand found James's, squeezing gently. She'd been nervous about this moment for weeks, ever since he'd suggested it. Meeting his first wife's memory felt like crossing a threshold she wasn't ready for. James nodded, throat tight with emotion. "Sarah would have wanted to meet her," he said, voice steady despite trembling hands. "She always believed in expanding circles of love, not replacing what came before." He led them down the familiar path he'd walked alone these past 3 years, past weathered headstones, telling stories of lives lived and love remembered. His feet knew every step, every tree root pushing through earth. They passed marble angels and elaborate monuments until they reached the modest granite headstone under an old oak. The stone was simple, elegant, just as Sarah would have wanted. The granite caught morning light, reflecting dappled shadows from oak leaves above. "Sarah Elizabeth Holloway, beloved wife and mother forever in our hearts," Lily stepped forward first, confident and familiar. She placed her daisies at the headstone's base with reverence beyond her 7 years. The white petals glowed against dark granite. She touched the cool stone briefly. "Hi, Mommy," she whispered. "I brought some special people to meet you." James knelt in the soft grass, guiding Elena down beside him. Hope looked around with bright eyes, reaching out to touch Lily's flowers with gentle fingers. Then she looked up at James with questioning dark eyes that seemed to sense this moment's importance. "Hope," James said, voice thick with emotion, "this is Sarah. She was my wife, and Lily's mommy." He paused, fingers tracing the headstone's smooth edge. "And in a way, she helped bring us all together. She taught me what real love looked like, and that love doesn't run out when you give it away. It just grows." Elena shifted Hope more securely, tears gathering as she watched James trace Sarah's name. His touch was gentle, reverent, full of memories playing across his face. Morning breeze rustled oak leaves above, creating a gentle symphony wrapping around them like a blessing. "Sarah," James continued, voice growing stronger, "this is Hope. Remember when you told me, right here, that someday I'd find love again? That I'd know when it was right because it wouldn't feel like betraying what we had?" He smiled through tears. "Well, you were right, as usual." Hope patted the headstone with her small palm, babbling softly. The innocent gesture, pure and without understanding of grief, brought fresh tears to everyone's eyes. Elena leaned forward, placing pale pink roses beside Lily's daisies. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for sharing your family with us, for raising such a wonderful daughter in Lily." She glanced at James with love and deeper gratitude, and for loving James so well that he never lost his capacity for love. For teaching him, his heart was big enough for all of us. Lily settled against her father's shoulder. "Daddy says you send us signs sometimes," she said matter-of-factly, "like cardinals visiting our window or hearing your favorite song when we need to smile." She paused, face serious. "I think you helped bring Hope and Elena to us." That was the biggest sign of all. James wrapped an arm around his daughter, reached for Elena's hand with the other. Hope watched, then placed her tiny hand on top of theirs, creating a circle of connection encompassing not just them, but Sarah's memory too. "Thank you," James said softly, "for giving me 2 chances at love, for showing me the heart doesn't replace, it expands." His voice broke slightly. "I'll always carry you in my heart, Sarah. You're woven into everything good about me. But you were right. There was room for more love, room for healing without forgetting." Wind picked up, sending golden leaves spiraling down like nature's confetti. Hope giggled with delight, reaching up to catch them, her laughter bright in the cemetery's quiet. Elena rested her head on James's shoulder. "I think she knows," she whispered. "I think she's happy for us. I can feel it, like a blessing." James nodded, overwhelmed by emotion. He remembered coming here alone over 3 years, lost in grief, talking to a headstone. Now, surrounded by his expanding family, the grief felt different, still real, but transformed into something coexisting with new joy. They sat in comfortable silence while Hope played with fallen leaves, and Lily told Sarah about her latest art project. A family drawing, now including Elena and Hope, all holding hands under a big sun. A pair of cardinals landed above them, bright red against autumn foliage, and Lily smiled, nudging her father. Finally, as other visitors stirred in the distance, James stood slowly, helping Elena while she balanced drowsy Hope. "Time to go, sweetheart," he said gently to Lily, who nodded and gave the headstone one last pat, whispering a private goodbye. Walking back toward the truck, Hope began humming, the same lullaby James had sung that first night in daycare, the melody that started their journey together. The sweet tune floated on the breeze, weaving through cemetery silence like an invisible thread, connecting past and present, memory and hope. James and Elena walked hand in hand, while Lily skipped ahead, occasionally examining headstones or waving at cardinals following from tree to tree. Hope continued humming, voice growing softer with drowsiness, but the melody carried like a gentle goodbye. Sunlight caught morning dew clinging to grass and flowers, making the cemetery sparkle like diamonds on green velvet. At the truck, James paused for one last look at Sarah's grave under the protective oak. The mixed bouquet lay perfectly arranged against stone, symbolizing two families joined by love, loss, and hope's enduring power. Elena squeezed his hand, understanding his need for this final connection. Hope's humming grew softer, mixing with rustling leaves and birdsong, creating a gentle melody following them as they climbed into the truck and headed home, carrying the past's blessing and the future's promise. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of James Holloway, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.